Before the word China ever existed, there was a river the color of old gold, and the people who learned to live beside its temper. They watched it flood and rise and swallow whole seasons of work in a single night. They built anyway. Millet grew in the cold north, where the soil was dry and thin. Rice grew in the wetlands to the south, in a different climate entirely, under different skies. These were not one people. They were many, scattered across a landscape that had not yet agreed to call itself anything. What grew from that scattered beginning became something almost too large to hold in a single telling. Dynasties rose from river valleys and fell into the hands of the next ambitious house. Emperors buried themselves beneath armies made of clay. A woman ruled from behind a curtain, and another ruled from the throne itself in her own name, against every tradition built to keep her out. This is a story that keeps being written by whoever wins. Descend toward it, and the land splits into two different worlds before any king has claimed either one. To the north, the soil is dry and pale, dusted with wind-blown earth that farmers learn to work into fields of millet. To the south, the ground stays wet through most of the year, folding into marshland where rice takes root in standing water. These are not variations on one way of living. They are two separate answers to the same problem, developed by people who may never have met the people solving it the other way. Follow the land further than the river alone, southwest into mountain country, where a different valley keeps its own secrets. Here, sometime in a past no text remembers, someone shaped a bronze face unlike anything made along the yellow river. Its eyes bulge outward on stalks, staring past whoever stands in front of it. No inscription accompanies it. No name survives for the person who cast it, and no name survives for whoever it was made to represent. It was buried deliberately, broken and burned first, alongside thousands of objects treated the same way, in pits that held no bodies and no words at all. That silence is the point. Whatever story this valley told about itself, it told it entirely through objects, and the objects do not translate on their own. Somewhere else, in the same distant centuries, a different people were beginning to press marks into bone and shell, marks that would eventually become sentences. This valley never did, or if it did, nothing survived to show it. Two civilizations occupied the same stretch of centuries, separated by mountains and by an entirely different relationship to memory itself. Move forward now, past all of it, to a walled city at dusk, torches catching against packed earth ramparts high enough to shadow the fields outside them. Smoke rises from workshops where bronze is being poured into molds for vessels that will outlast every person currently breathing near them. This is what all of it eventually becomes: a capital, a court, a dynasty with a name that later ages will repeat as though it had always been inevitable. It was not always here. It was not always one thing. Go back further than any of it. Before bronze. Before writing. Before this land had a name. If you find this kind of patient, immersive exploration meaningful, a like and a subscription help the next story get made. Sharing with a single person who thinks this way is the most powerful thing you can do. let this be the only thing you're following now. Whatever else you're doing, walking, working, studying, or letting the evening carry you towards sleep, let the pace of the old river carry you too. There is a great deal of ground ahead, and it begins further back than most people ever go. This is the entire history of ancient China. Millet in the dry north, rice in the wet south, two different worlds farming two different rivers. That is the story most people carry into this period. A clean line drawn across a map, one crop on each side. The evidence tells a messier story. Somewhere in the middle, between the Yellow River Basin and the Yangtze, farmers spent centuries deciding which world they belonged to, and the answer kept changing. The clearest case sits at Baligang, a site in the Nanyang Basin, positioned almost exactly between the two river systems. Rice appears there astonishingly early, present in small amounts from the very first farming communities in the region. For generations, it stayed a minor crop, grown alongside a diet still dominated by millet. Then, under the influence of the Yangshao culture, spreading down from the north, something shifted. Rice intensified, tracking closely with cultural influence arriving from the south instead. That influence had a name. Communities associated with the Qijialing and Shijiahe cultures, both rooted deep in rice country, appear to have reshaped how Baligang's farmers work their fields. Rice cultivation grew heavier during this period, more central to the local diet, more central to daily labor. It reads like a community drifting south in practice, even while remaining fixed in place on the ground. The drift did not stop there. Later still, under the northern Longshan culture's growing reach, the balance swung back. Millet reasserted itself as the dominant crop, and Baligang's farmers returned to a way of living closer to their northern neighbors. 3 separate periods, 3 separate identities, all recorded in the same patch of ground by people who never moved anywhere at all. Archaeologists studying the wider Neolithic landscape do not see one line splitting north from south. They count roughly 8 distinct regional culture zones, each shaped by local geography, local rivers, and local trade, long before any of them called themselves one civilization. Baligang sits exactly where 2 of those zones meet and overlap. Its shifting harvest is the clearest surviving record of that overlap in motion. Eventually, by the later Yangshao period, something more stable took hold across the wider region. The north settled into a complementary system built around millet and soybean, farmed together on dry ground. The south settled into rice paired with fish, farmed together in wetter country built around slow-moving water. 2 systems, finely distinct, but only after centuries of communities like Baligang testing where the boundary actually was. This is the ground everything else grows from, literally and otherwise. Before any king claimed a river valley, before any dynasty claimed a mandate to rule, there were simply people. They adjusted crop by crop to their neighbors and their soil. Unity would come much later, and it would always be a claim made after the fact, never a condition anyone started with. Further south, in the lower Yangtze Valley, a different kind of evidence survived, not from what people grew, but from what they made with their hands. The site is called Tianloshan, and its ground stayed waterlogged for thousands of years. That standing water did something rare. It kept organic material intact: wood, fiber, bone, in conditions where most sites lose everything but stone and pottery within a few centuries. What survived there was a toolkit for making cloth, more complete than almost anywhere else in the Neolithic world. Researchers recovered 228 perforated discs used to prepare raw fiber, alongside spindle whorls for twisting it into thread and bone needles for sewing finished cloth. Laid out together, the tools trace an entire process, from raw plant fiber to spun thread to woven fabric to a finished, wearable garment. That completeness allowed the full production sequence to be reconstructed step by step. Fiber preparation, spinning, loom weaving, needlework. It reads as one continuous chain of labor, not scattered, disconnected artifacts. Few Neolithic sites anywhere preserve enough of the process to see the whole chain in one place. The tools themselves told a second story, one about who held them. Spindle whorls and fiber preparation discs turn up overwhelmingly in burials identified as female. The pattern is consistent enough across sites and periods that the tools themselves now serve as a working guide to a skeleton's sex. This was not a rule imposed later by any philosopher or any court. It was already the pattern here, in graves older than writing, older than any named religion, older than the state itself. A separate case, far to the west on the Tibetan plateau, shows where that pattern eventually led. Early textile tools there appear in small household burials tied to individual spinners working within their own families. Centuries later, the same kind of tools appear in large elite burials instead, now made of bronze and treated as symbols of status and rank. Textile work did not stay a private, domestic task forever. It became something people could be powerful through, and something the powerful chose to be buried holding. None of this survives as a name or a face or a single remembered life. It survives as a pattern in the dirt, repeated often enough across the centuries that it stops being coincidence. Generations of women spun, wove, and sewed. The only reason any of it is legible now is that someone chose to send them into the ground with the tools of their own hands. Further north, in the province now called Shang, a different kind of site raises a different kind of question. It is called Shimao, a stone-walled settlement roughly 4 square kilometers in size, its ramparts once stretching close to 10 kilometers around the city. It dates to somewhere between 4,200 and 3,700 years ago. Even now, it shows clear zoning and clear hierarchy. A city planned rather than grown by accident. At its center stood a stepped pyramid, home to an elite who lived apart from everyone else inside the walls. At the city's east gate, excavators found something that set Shimao apart from almost every other site of its era. Roughly 80 human skulls, arranged deliberately near the entrance, the largest known concentration of sacrificial remains anywhere in China before the later Shang period. For decades, the working assumption rested on skeletal shape alone, the traditional method for estimating sex from bone. That method suggested most of the victims were women. a genomic project spanning 13 years went looking for confirmation and found something else entirely. Researchers sequenced usable ancient DNA from 144 individuals across Shimao and its satellite sites, reconstructing family trees that reached back 4 generations among the city's elite. Those pedigrees revealed a firmly patrilineal, patrilocal society, power and land passed down consistently through men. Inside that larger dataset sat a smaller, sharper finding: 10 individuals specifically from the Eastgate deposit. 9 of the 10 tested male. The old assumption, built on bone shape alone, had gotten the basic fact backward. 10 individuals is a small sample within a much larger study, and the pattern is best described as possibly sex-specific ritual rather than certainty. Still, a clear geographic pattern held. Male remains cluster specifically at the East Gate, while female sacrificial remains turn up instead in elite cemeteries elsewhere across the site. Different locations, it seems, called for different rites. Whatever purpose the Eastgate sacrifice served, likely tied to consecrating the city's defenses, it appears to have specifically required men. The DNA also settled a separate question about where Shimao's people came from at all. Their genetic ancestry traces predominantly to local populations from roughly 1,000 years earlier. This was a long-rooted regional culture, not an outside group arriving to found something new. None of this was visible from the bones alone. Getting the basic facts of an 80-person mass grave correct took genetic work that overturned an assumption which had stood unquestioned for decades. That gap between what the skeletons seemed to say and what the genes actually proved is itself the lesson worth carrying forward. Further east, at Anyang, the Shang dynasty's own capital eventually produced a tomb that needed no correcting at all because it was never disturbed to begin with. In 1976, archaeologists opened a vertical pit roughly 5.5 meters by 4 at its mouth, sunk nearly 8 meters into the earth. It belonged to a woman named Fu Hao, and unlike every royal tomb at Anyang, looters had never found it. What they found instead was a complete, countable record of Shang elite wealth. 468 bronze objects. Somewhere near 750 jade pieces, several of them centuries older than Fu Hao herself, heirlooms collected long before they were buried with her. Nearly 6,900 cowrie shells, the currency of the age, stacked beside her in staggering quantity. 16 people and 6 dogs were sacrificed and interred alongside her, the tomb's grimmer half of the same inventory. Oracle bone inscriptions, the Shang court's own written records, confirm who she was independently of anything buried with her. They name her directly as a general, leading a campaign of 13,000 troops against the Qiang people. It stands as one of the largest documented military forces of the entire Shang period. Other inscriptions record the royal household's concern for her health and later for her difficult childbirth. She was not a symbolic figure attached to a king's household. She commanded. Popular retellings sometimes add a detail that never belonged to her tomb at all: a chariot, horses buried beside her in the grave. That detail comes from other elite tombs nearby at Anyang, where chariot and horse burial genuinely was practiced. Fu Hao's own grave contains neither. The pattern belonged to her social class and her city, not to her personally, and the distinction matters for anyone trying to see her clearly. there is a final irony worth carrying forward. Fu Hao was not buried in the royal cemetery beside the Shang kings she served. Her status, while extraordinary, likely still fell short of what royalty alone commanded. That placement, a kind of quiet secondary status in her own lifetime, is precisely why looters never found her. Every royal tomb in that cemetery was stripped bare centuries ago. The clearest surviving window into Shang wealth and Shang command belongs to someone the Shang themselves ranked as less than first. West of Anyang, near the modern city of Luoyang, a much older site raises the oldest version of the same question. It is called Erlitou, a sprawling complex of palace foundations and bronze workshops, dated to roughly 1750 to 1520 BCE. Most Chinese archaeologists call it the late capital of the Jia, the dynasty later texts describe as ruling before the Shang. The site itself has never once confirmed that name. Erlitou covers roughly 3 square kilometers. Only a small fraction of that ground, around 59,500 square meters, has actually been excavated since digging began in 1959. What has come up is unmistakable. Palace foundations, bronze workshops running at real scale, a hierarchical society with the wealth and organization to build monumentally, sitting exactly where later legend says the Xia capital should be. What has never come up is a name. No inscription at Erlitou identifies a Xia king. Nothing found there uses the word Xia at all. The identification rests entirely on texts written centuries later, chiefly the Shiji and the Bamboo Annals, both compiled long after Erlitou itself had crumbled into foundation stones. Chinese archaeologists working in a long-standing tradition generally treat the artifact record as speaking for itself. They read Erlitou's material culture as continuous with the Xia the later texts describe. Critics, both overseas and within China, push back on that confidence. They argue it borrows too much certainty from texts that were themselves reconstructing a distant, half-remembered past. Pottery and bronze alone, they say, cannot prove which dynasty or which name a people called themselves. New excavation keeps reshaping the argument without resolving it. In 2024 alone, walled sections turned up near the Palace District's central crossroads, suggesting the fortified core was larger than previously mapped. In the same year, archaeologists identified the largest known Erlitou culture settlement far to the south, in Henan. Whatever this culture was, it clearly extended well past the one site carrying its name. The uncertainty runs deep enough to shape how the site presents itself. Erlitou's own lead archaeologist has spent a career convinced this is very likely the Xia capital. Even so, stating that as settled fact in the museum's own name, by this archaeologist's own account, would be controversial. The strongest available guess and the safest public claim are not the same thing, and the site's own leadership knows it. A story that predates even Erlitou's ruins offers one possible echo of the same dynasty. Later tradition credits a man named Yu with taming a catastrophic flood and, through that success, founding the Xia in the first place. It belongs to legend rather than confirmed history, since the earliest surviving texts about Yu never actually connect his flood taming to founding anything at all. Political memory, it seems, likes its rulers to have controlled water before it lets them control people. At Anyang, generations after early Tu fell silent, the Shang solved the naming problem for themselves. They wrote everything down, and a surprising amount of it survives. The medium was bone, ox shoulder blades and turtle shells, cleaned, polished and carved with rows of small pits on their underside. A diviner pressed a heated rod into one of those pits until the bone cracked audibly on the opposite face. The shape and direction of the crack became the answer, read aloud to a question addressed directly to a specific, named royal ancestor. This was not vague ritual. It was procedure repeated with the same steps, the same materials, the same expectation of a legible result each time. A complete record could carry 4 parts. First, a preface naming the date and the diviner performing the rite. Second, the charge, the actual question put to the ancestor. Third, a prognostication, the king's own reading of what the crack meant. Fourth, sometimes, a verification recording what genuinely happened afterward. Not every inscription carried all 4, but the format itself reveals a state treating its conversations with the dead as something worth auditing. More than 150,000 inscribed pieces have survived from Anyang alone, an enormous archive for a practice most outsiders imagine as pure superstition. The topics inscribed on them range far beyond the sacred. Harvests, weather, warfare, and under King Wu Ding especially, an unusually wide range of royal concerns right down to his own body. Wu Ding's inscriptions return again and again to a single recurring ailment, a sick tooth which he blamed on his dead father's lingering anger. He treated it with offerings to specific ancestresses. It reads almost intimate against the weight of the wider archive, a king's toothache preserved in the same script as his military campaigns. Skeletal remains recovered from Yingxiu confirm the population there suffered widespread cavities, abscesses, and gum disease. Wu Ding's toothache was not colorful invention. It was an ordinary affliction of the age, carried by a king with the resources to have it inscribed. Beneath the king himself sat a structure historians describe as a leader of lineage leaders. Rule ran less through a standing bureaucracy than through kinship, tribute, and ritual obligation binding allied families to the throne. It remains a debated reconstruction rather than settled consensus, but it fits what the bones themselves record. A king governed by staying in continuous, auditable contact with everyone above and below him, living and dead alike. Even the discovery of this entire archive carries its own small, accidental story. In 1899, a scholar suffering from malaria was prescribed powdered dragon bone as medicine, a common ingredient in the period's pharmacies. Examining the bones before grinding them, he noticed carved marks he did not recognize as decoration. What he was holding was ancient script, the first proof that Chinese writing reached back to the Shang. Every bronze vessel pulled from Anyang's tombs tells a story of skill. It also tells a story of distance, one usually left out entirely. Anyang sits in the one region of ancient China with almost no local copper, tin, or lead. Even so, it became the largest bronze-consuming center the late Shang world ever built. None of that metal was local. Copper came from the middle and lower reaches of the Yangtze, hundreds of miles to the south. Tin arrived from Yunnan, further still. Lead moved in from the Hexi Corridor in the west and from settlements scattered across the northeast. Every ritual vessel cast at Anyang began its life as ore hauled across territory the Shang did not directly control. The casting method itself was distinctly Shang. Metalworkers built a clay model of the finished object, then pressed sectional molds around it and fired the whole assembly hard. Molten bronze was poured through carved gates and vents into the assembled mold. The technique, called piece mold casting, differed from the lost wax methods used elsewhere in the ancient world. It allowed for the complex, high-relief surfaces that make Shang bronzes so immediately recognizable. Anyang's foundries were not one workshop doing everything. They were spatially separated by function. One operated across nearly the entire Shang period, producing mainly ritual vessels. Another was dedicated to weapons and tools, a third active only through the dynasty's middle and late phases. Earlier Shang workshops elsewhere already show this same division of labor. Ore, furnace fragments, slag, and molds turn up together in storage pits, a frozen snapshot of a production line mid-operation. The scale of what all this distance and division ultimately produced is best captured in a single object. A ritual vessel weighing 832.84 kilograms, commissioned generations later by a Shang king to honor his own mother. It was built for a temple, not a grave, cast from metal that had already traveled hundreds of miles before a single tool touched it. Bronze mastery, seen this way, was never really about the mold. It was about a state's capacity to move raw earth across a continent and turn it into permanence. That state, and the throne sitting at the center of it, eventually reached its final king. His name was Di Xin, and later tradition remembers him as one of history's great monsters. A wine pool deep enough to drown in. A forest of hanging meat. Ministers minced for offering criticism. Red-hot bronze pillars used to torture the condemned. It reads less like a biography than a catalogue of atrocity, assembled specifically to be unforgettable. The earliest surviving text to mention Di Xin does not describe any of this. It lists faults, but restrained ones, nothing close to the lurid detail later ages would attach to his name. Each subsequent retelling across the centuries adds more. Nevertheless, the story growing crueler the further it travels from the reign it claims to describe. That is not how memory usually behaves when it is simply preserving something true. Oracle bone inscriptions from Di Xin's actual reign tell a calmer story. Ongoing divination about military campaigns. Hunts. State affairs conducted with the same routine attentiveness his predecessors had shown. Territorial expansion continued against tribes to the east, the record of a functioning administration, not one collapsing under the weight of its own excess. The dynasty that overthrew Di Xin needed him monstrous. Their claim to legitimate rule rested on the idea that heaven withdraws its favor only from a genuinely unfit king. The more thoroughly his cruelty could be shown, the more secure their own new throne became. Every added detail served a purpose beyond storytelling. Each one made rebellion look less like ambition and more like moral necessity. Even the ground Dijin ruled from carries a name that was never truly his. Oracle bone texts refer to Anyang simply as this settlement, nothing more specific, nothing symbolic. The name Yin, the label history eventually used for the site and sometimes for the dynasty's final era, appears only in texts written after Zhou had already won. The worse a Shang king story gets, the newer it usually is, a villain built by the dynasty that needed him monstrous. That dynasty was the Zhou, and the story runs both ways. A vassal state becomes a dynasty at Muye and immediately needs an explanation for why that was allowed to happen. The Zhou were not strangers to Shang. They were subjects of it, a Western people settled along the Wei River Valley, paying homage to a king they served and eventually stopped believing in. Their leader carried a modest title, Count of the West, a rank that placed him inside the Shang order rather than outside it. For years he worked quietly within that position, drawing allied states away from Shang loyalty one at a time. Dijin noticed. He had the Count arrested on suspicion of disloyalty and held him. The Count died still a prisoner, or shortly after his release, depending on which account is followed. He never lived to see open war. But he left his son two things that mattered more than a throne. One was a coalition of Western tribes already leaning against Shang. The other was a plan already years in motion, needing only a final push. His son is remembered as King Wu, the martial king, and in the last months of the year now dated to 1046 BCE, he gave that push. He marched his coalition east toward the Shang heartland. At a place called Muye, the armies met. What happened at Muye is described in later texts with more confidence than the moment probably deserved. Shang conscripts are said to have turned on their own king mid-battle. Some accounts claim King Wu spared any soldier who had not personally fought against him, and was hailed for it as a protector of the people. That detail comes from tradition, not from anything carved in bronze at the time, and it should be heard that way. What is certain is simpler. Dijin's army broke. The king who had ruled for decades was finished in an afternoon. The date itself carries more certainty than the battle's texture does. For most of the 20th century, historians proposed one guess after another for when Muye actually happened. Over 40 separate proposals in total, spread across more than 100 years, from 1130 BCE down to 1018. Getting it right required two unrelated forms of evidence to agree. One was astronomical, a set of sky positions described in classical texts. That kind of detail can be checked against modern calculations of where the stars and planets actually stood on any given night in antiquity. The other was radiocarbon dating, taken from timber and grain, recovered at Zhou capital sites, layered against the same stretch of centuries. Neither method alone could close the gap. Together, they narrowed the range to a window of 30 years, and inside that window, only 1 year satisfied both the astronomical record and the radiocarbon curve. 1046 BCE. It is the date most widely accepted today, though not beyond all dispute. A full accounting of who ruled how long after Muye took far longer to settle than the battle itself. Zhou kings followed one another for generations. Their exact reign lengths went unresolved until 1976, when a set of bronze ritual vessels came out of the ground bearing long inscriptions. Cast centuries apart by different hands, they recorded the same royal sequence, confirming it independently of the texts historians had relied on until then. It took bronze buried and forgotten to finally settle what paper and memory alone could not. None of that solved the Zhou's actual problem, which had nothing to do with dates. They had beaten their own king in the field, and a defeated vassal army does not automatically become a legitimate royal house. Something had to explain why the throne now belonged to a family that, 1 year earlier, had answered to Dixin. The explanation the Zhou built would outlive every dynasty that came after them, including, eventually, their own. They did not simply announce that they had won and therefore deserved to rule. That argument dies the moment someone else wins. Instead, they reached for the sky. Shang religion had already recognized a high god, a distant figure rarely addressed directly, mostly approached through ancestor spirits who did the actual work of intercession. The Zhou took that remote god and rebuilt him into something far larger, something they called Tian, heaven itself. Not one deity among several, but the encompassing source of order over the whole human world. The two figures were never cleanly separated. Zhou texts speak of them almost interchangeably at times. But the expansion was deliberate, and it gave the Zhou something Shang religion had never quite offered: a god vast enough to authorize a change of kings. Around that expanded heaven, they built a specific claim. Heaven, the doctrine held, does not favor any one family by birth. It grants a ruling mandate to whichever ruler governs with virtue, and it withdraws that mandate the moment a ruler stops deserving it. One surviving Zhou text states it almost bluntly that heaven holds no partial affections and helps only the virtuous. Another folds the point into something closer to a warning, that heaven sees as the people see and hears as the people hear. Popular suffering was not treated as bad luck under this framework. It was treated as evidence. A starving province or a rebellious district became, in effect, heaven's own verdict on the man sitting the throne. The doctrine confirmed itself in every case it touched. A ruler who governed badly lost the mandate, by definition, the moment he was overthrown, since the overthrow itself was treated as the proof. A ruler who kept his throne simply still held it, mandate intact by the same logic. There was no outcome the theory could not absorb. Every successful rebellion became, after the fact, a demonstration of the doctrine working exactly as intended. The Zhou were careful about one more detail, and it mattered more than they may have realized at the time. Bronze inscriptions from the period anchor the mandate specifically to King Wen, the count who died in prison, as its sole original recipient. His son and the kings who followed did not each receive a fresh mandate of their own. They held it through descent from Wen. combined with their own conduct staying virtuous enough to keep it active. That second condition was the quiet cost of the whole arrangement. Bloodline alone was never declared sufficient. Virtue had to keep being demonstrated, generation after generation, or the same justification that had toppled Shang stood ready for whoever chose to use it next. Which is exactly what would happen centuries later to the Zhou themselves. One further piece of the new order arrived quietly, almost as an aside, inside this same reshaping of legitimacy. Later idealized accounts describe an early Zhou land system, fields arranged in a 9-part grid. One central plot was worked collectively for the state, 8 surrounding plots by individual families for their own support. Whether this so-called well-field system ever operated exactly as described remains genuinely uncertain. Many historians treat it as a later philosophical ideal projected backward onto the Zhou founding. A tidy image of fairness rather than a working record of how land was actually divided. It survives less as economic history than as a symbol of what an ordered, virtuous state was imagined to look like. One more piece of the Zhou's founding myth: good government answering bad. The mandate of heaven needed one more piece to feel complete. If virtue removes a dynasty and virtue installs the next one, the pattern only convinces if it has happened before. The Zhou had a name ready for that earlier failure. Xia, the dynasty said to have ruled before Shang, brought down in its own turn by corruption and misrule. Whether Xia actually existed is a genuinely open argument, not a settled question with an obvious answer either way. No oracle bone from the Shang period has ever been shown to contain the character for Xia in any of its later meanings. Out of more than 150,000 surviving inscribed pieces, not one. A philological review published in 2013 went further, concluding the word does not appear to have belonged to the late Shang vocabulary at all. That is a strange silence for a dynasty supposedly ruling not long before. One remembered clearly enough by later generations to be named, numbered, and given a full list of kings. Some historians push the skepticism further still. They argue that individual Xia kings named in later texts were outright Zhou inventions, added to a king list to make a genealogy look complete. A few go further and start from a simple question. What if Xia was never a memory at all, but a myth wearing the clothes of one? On this reading, the whole idea began as a Shang story about an inverse opposite people existing somewhere in the moral background rather than the historical record. The Zhou then took that old myth and turned it into a real, datable dynasty. Doing so gave their new doctrine, virtuous founder replacing corrupt predecessor, a second working example, a pattern rather than a single argument built for one conquest. Not every historian accepts that. Defenders of Xia's historicity point to real archaeological remains in the right region and the right general period. Cities and bronze workshops that existed whether or not anyone at the time called them Xia. The absence of an inscription naming a dynasty, they argue, does not prove the society underneath the name was invented. A people can be real and simply unrecorded under the label later given to them. What makes the argument worth sitting with is not which side turns out correct. It is what the uncertainty itself reveals. The Zhou had already shown they could author a monster out of a defeated king they actually fought. Authoring an entire prior dynasty out of nothing was, by comparison, a smaller act of invention. Political memory in early China did not always begin with an event. Sometimes it began with the argument an event was later needed to support. The Zhou's ideological machine solved one problem and created another. If heaven's mandate could be lost, it could also be lost slowly, in pieces, over centuries. Rival states carved up what had once been a single ritual order. By the time a minor official in the state of Lu began arguing that the whole system could still be repaired, nobody with real power was listening. His name was Confucius, and almost nothing about his career resembles the sage later centuries made of him. Around 500 BCE, he held a handful of minor administrative posts in Lu, modest positions inside a fading court. He tried to turn his ideas about ritual, hierarchy, and moral government into actual policy. He believed disorder had a cause and a cure. Rulers who governed with genuine virtue, who kept the old rights and obligations intact, would restore the stability the age had lost. It was, in its way, a version of the same argument the Zhou had built centuries earlier. Virtue holds a state together. Its absence tears one apart. Lu's court was not persuaded, at least not for long enough to matter. His political standing collapsed, and rather than retire into obscurity, he left. For roughly 14 years, he traveled from state to state, presenting the same case to one ruler after another. Take me in. Let me show you how virtue governs. None did. Some listened politely and dismissed him once he had gone. Others declined to hear him at all. A man already past 50, when the wandering began, carried the same argument across state after state, year after year. No home, no patronage, no office he believed he was suited to hold. Rejection like that rarely makes it into how a life is later summarized. It is easier afterward to skip straight to the wisdom and leave out the decades spent being turned away for it. What actually rescued Confucius from historical irrelevance was not persuasion. It was defeat, absorbed differently than most defeats are. He returned to Lu in old age. The political career finished, no ruler ever having adopted his program. But he had spent those wandering years teaching as well as pleading, gathering students who wrote down what he said. After his death, they assembled it into something that could travel further than he ever had. The Analects exists because the career failed. A successful official leaves administrative records. A failed one, if he is fortunate enough to be heard by the right listeners, leaves a philosophy. Confucius was the first sign of a pattern that would repeat across this collapsing world, though he was not the last figure it touched. When a court has no room left for an idea, the idea does not necessarily die. It sometimes finds an entirely different way to survive the court that rejected it. Nowhere is the pattern stranger than in the story handed down about a man called Laozi. Tradition places him inside the Zhou court itself, working as an archivist, watching the same slow disintegration Confucius later diagnosed from the outside. Where Confucius chose 14 years of arguing for reform, tradition has Laozi choosing the opposite response entirely. He simply left. The story goes that he rode west, away from the crumbling court and everything it represented, intending to vanish from civilization altogether. At a border pass, a gatekeeper recognized him and refused to let him pass without first writing down what he knew. Laozi is said to have sat and composed a short text on the way the world actually works, the Tao Te Ching. Then he continued west, disappearing from every subsequent record. No death is reported. No grave. He simply rides out of the story and does not come back. It is a striking image, and it may not describe a real event or even a real single person. Modern scholarship is genuinely divided over whether Laozi was 1/6th century individual at all. Some historians accept a single author behind the name. Others treat Laozi as a composite figure, a tradition gradually assembled and attached to a text. That text shows signs of being compiled and edited across a span longer than one lifetime could cover. The uncertainty runs deeper than a missing biography. It runs all the way down to whether there was ever one man there to have a biography in the first place. Whether or not that particular man existed, the story he was given carries the same weight as the failure Confucius actually lived through. Both describe a court no longer capable of holding its own officials. Official record collapsing into wandering, into exile, into whatever survives once the institution itself stops being trustworthy. Confucius left and kept arguing. Laozi, real or composite, is remembered as having simply ridden past the argument altogether. What both stories agree on is where the value ended up. Not in an office, not in a title or a rank or a place at court. In the words that outlasted the men who failed to be heard while they were still alive to say them. A man in his 50s, still without the office he had spent his life pursuing, is walking home to Lu, having convinced no one. Confucius walked home, having built nothing that could be seen or held. In the same age, in a rival state, another man built something that could be measured. Every grain of tax, every name in a register accounted for. It outlived him too, but not the way he intended. A minister's law was so thorough it caught and doomed its own architect the day his political protection disappeared. His name was Shang, and he had not been born in Qin at all. He arrived from a smaller eastern state, hired by Duke Xiao of Qin to solve a single problem. Qin was poor, disorganized, and surrounded by rivals who considered it half barbarian. Duke Xiao wanted a state that could fight and win, and he gave Shang the authority to build one. Shang did not build an army first. He built a system for counting people, and counting was the whole of his method. Every household was registered, grouped with its neighbors, and made responsible for what its neighbors did. If one family broke the law and the household beside it stayed silent, both were punished together. Hereditary nobles lost the privileges that had once come simply from birth. rank now came from two things only, and both could be measured. A man rose through military merit, counted in enemy heads taken in battle, or through agricultural output, counted in grain delivered to the state. Punishment was harsh, and it was applied the same way to everyone it touched. A noble's son who broke the law faced the same penalty as a farmer's son. This alone made Qin unusual among the warring states, where aristocratic birth had always brought leniency. Xiangyang's laws did not bend for status, only for compliance, and compliance was tracked constantly through the household registers he had built. Within a generation, Qin could raise soldiers, gather grain, and organize labor with a precision no rival state could match. This was the machinery that would later let Qin's armies grind down 6 other kingdoms and end the warring states altogether. Duke Xiao died still trusting the man who had remade his kingdom. Everything changed the moment he did. The nobles Xiangyang had stripped of privilege, had waited years for this. They accused him of treason before the new king, and the accusation was really an old grudge, finally allowed to speak. Xiangyang understood immediately what was coming and fled toward the border, hoping to disappear into a neighboring state before his enemies could reach him. He reportedly stopped at an inn along the road, seeking nothing more than a bed for the night. The innkeeper refused him. Qin law required every guest to show registration papers before being given lodging, and anyone who sheltered an unregistered traveler shared in whatever punishment that traveler faced. Xiangyang had written that law himself years earlier as part of the same system that tracked every household in the state. The scene has likely gathered embellishment over the centuries of retelling, though its core detail probably holds. Even softened by legend, it survives because the irony needed no exaggeration to land. He had spent his career making Qin legible enough that no one could hide from it. In his final hours, hunted and alone, he discovered that the system recognized no exception for the man who built it. An ordinary innkeeper, acting only to protect himself, turned him away without malice and without choice. The law simply worked, exactly as designed, on the one man who might have expected it to look away. He was captured shortly afterward and executed by dismemberment, his body torn apart by chariots as a public warning to anyone who might defy the new king. The nobles who destroyed him kept nearly everything he had built. Household registration stayed in place. Merit-based rank stayed in place. Mutual surveillance stayed in place. Qin's enemies had wanted the architect gone, not the architecture, and the machinery of the state outlived the man who had designed it by more than a century. That machinery needed fuel, and fuel meant food security on a scale Qin's rivals could not reach. A generation after Xiangyang's death, a Qin governor named Li Bing was sent to the Shu region. His task was a river that flooded its banks nearly every year. The Min River carried meltwater down from the mountains with such force that entire harvests could vanish in a single season. Li Bing chose not to dam it. He divided it instead, cutting channels that split the current and let the excess water spread across the land as irrigation rather than disaster. The system, known later as Dujiangyan, turned the flood-prone Chengdu Plain into some of the most reliable farmland in the region. It required no gates to close, no walls to maintain against the river's full force, only the shape of the channels themselves. Grain from that plain fed Qin's population for decades. Decades later, it fed the armies that swept through the 6 remaining kingdoms and ended the age of warring states. The system is still in use today, more than 2,000 years after Li Bing cut the first channel. Qin's empire was not built primarily on conquest, or even on fear. It was built on legibility, on a state that could see everything inside itself. The clearest proof of that is not a monument or a battlefield. It is a bureaucrat's personal copy of the law, buried with him in a tomb no one opened for over 2,000 years. His name was Shi, and he worked his way up through Qin's administration the way a career official does. He began as a scribe, moved on to clerk, and finished his working life as a prison officer in Yunmeng County, in what is now Hubei province. None of that would ordinarily separate him from thousands of other minor officials who served and died across the Qin bureaucracy. What separated him was what he chose to take into his grave. In December of 1975, archaeologists opened Tomb 11 at Shuihudi and found more than 1,000 bamboo slips laid beside his remains. There were 1,155 complete slips and roughly 80 fragments, carrying close to 40,000 characters between them. This was not a symbolic gesture, and it was not a ceremonial text meant to honor the dead. It was Xi's working law library, the actual statutes an official in his position needed to do his job correctly. Among them was a set known as the 18 Kinds of Qin Laws. The detail inside those laws is what makes the discovery matter. They cover agriculture, government accounting, and the administration of corvée labor, the unpaid work terms the state could demand from its subjects. They specify penalties for officials who mismanaged the resources under their charge. A supervisor responsible for a section of city wall could be held personally liable if that wall collapsed within a set period after construction. The law did not simply punish failure after the fact. It built failure into a timeline, and it held a named official answerable to that timeline. What makes this more striking is who owned the text. Xi was not a court minister shaping policy from the capital. He was a working judicial officer, far from the center of power. He still needed and kept and evidently valued enough to be buried with a text this granular. If the law reached this far down the ladder, into the hands of a provincial clerk rather than a ministerial archive, then something becomes visible. Qin's real innovation comes into view. The state did not simply conquer its rivals. It made its own population and its own officials trackable and accountable at a level no earlier Chinese state had managed. Xi's career path humanizes what could otherwise remain an abstraction. Scribe, clerk, prison officer, each step a small promotion inside a system built entirely on measurement. For him, the law was not a distant instrument of state power described in later histories. It was the daily texture of his working life, the thing he consulted to know whether he had done his job correctly. It was also, apparently, something he wanted with him even in death. A man buried with his statutes is a man who lived inside the machinery Shang had designed a century earlier. He trusted it enough, or feared it enough, to carry it into the ground. The first emperor's most famous monument is often described the same way, as proof that Qin had invented something like an assembly line. Thousands of identical soldiers, the story goes, stamped out of a single ancient system with perfectly interchangeable parts. The image is compelling, and it is not quite what the evidence shows. 216 bronze crossbow triggers recovered from Pit 1 of the Terracotta Army tell a more precise story than the assembly line image allows. Measured and sorted by type, they show the kind of uniformity a true assembly line would leave behind, but only in part. What emerges is strong consistency, though only within particular subgroups of parts, not across the collection as a whole. Triggers within the same group matched each other closely. Triggers from different groups did not automatically interchange the way mass-produced modern parts would. The pattern points to something more specific than a single production line. Individual workshop cells, each staffed by its own craftsman, appear to have manufactured batches of parts to a shared standard. The likely method was centralized oversight specifying tolerances and methods. The army's arrowheads show the same signature, standardized so precisely that visual inspection alone cannot separate one workshop's output from another's. Distinguishing them requires chemical analysis of the metal itself. That precision is real, and it is still not the same claim as universal interchangeability. Assembly required its own final step. Filing and fitting marks on surviving components suggest craftsmen adjusted parts by hand during assembly, matching pieces that were close in tolerance but not identical. A trigger from one workshop's batch could be made to fit a stock from another, but only after a craftsman's hand corrected the small variance between them. This was administered production with genuine quality control and traceability. It was a supervised network of workshops, each answering to a shared standard, rather than one continuous line where any part fit any figure automatically. It is, if anything, a more demanding organizational achievement than the popular myth allows. Running a single mechanized process would have required inventing a technology centuries ahead of its time. Coordinating dozens of separate workshops toward one shared specification and then reconciling their output by hand required something else entirely. It required a bureaucracy capable of enforcing consistency across people rather than machines. Behind that coordination stood an enormous labor force whose individual names are almost entirely lost to history. Thousands of craftsmen worked in specialized units, each accountable to a standard someone above them had set and someone above them was checking. Their identities did not survive. Their discipline did, measurable today in the very objects their hands once shaped and fit together. The other monument bearing the first emperor's name suffers from a similar gap between image and evidence. Ask most people to picture the Great Wall, and they will describe a stone and brick structure marching across ridgelines, precisely the version that appears in nearly every photograph. That wall exists. Qin did not build it. What Qin's engineers actually constructed under General Meng Tian was rammed earth, not stone, and it was not one continuous new structure built from nothing. Meng Tian's forces connected and extended earthworks that earlier warring states' powers had already raised along the frontier. They followed the natural line of mountain barriers rather than imposing a uniform structure across the landscape. A surviving historical account describes his method directly, using the mountains themselves as barriers and carving passage through valleys where needed. The description matches what archaeology has since confirmed, not a retrofit invented by modern scholars, but a continuity between ancient text and buried earth. The brick and stone wall that draws millions of visitors today belongs to the Ming Dynasty, built roughly 1,500 years after Qin's rammed earth frontier. Ming engineers faced a different enemy and a different set of resources, and they built accordingly. Their wall used fired brick and dressed stone, meant to hold against cannon rather than cavalry. Two different walls, separated by a millennium and a half, and built for two different wars, have quietly merged in popular memory. One continuous monument, bearing one emperor's name, is the result. The first emperor built something real, a linked chain of packed earth that followed ridgelines his engineers judged the enemy could not easily cross. Its foundations still trace that mountain terrain in places today, worn low but not entirely gone. He did not build the version everyone pictures when they hear the words Great Wall. The wall he did build has spent most of its existence overshadowed by the one that came after it. Popular memory compresses what came next into a single phrase, burning books and burying scholars, spoken as though it names one continuous atrocity. It does not. The two halves of that phrase rest on entirely different ground, one built from documented policy and the other from a single contested story. The difference between them says as much about how history gets written as it does about the first emperor himself. The book burning is the documented half. In 213 BCE, Chancellor Li Sai submitted a memorial to the throne. It proposed destroying historical and philosophical texts that did not originate from Qin's own state records. The policy explicitly spared practical knowledge. Texts on agriculture, medicine, and divination were left untouched, along with Qin's own archives. This was not an attack on knowledge in general. It was a targeted move against texts capable of legitimizing rival states or rival philosophies, preserved competing histories that could undercut Qin's own claim to rule. Li Si's memorial survives close to its original form, a policy that genuinely happened, recorded near the time it occurred rather than reconstructed from later memory. The following year produced the story that has since overshadowed the policy itself, the burying of scholars. Here the evidentiary ground shifts completely. The entire account comes from a single history compiled roughly a century after the events it describes. It was written by someone who was not present, working from whatever traditions had survived that long. Even that one source is messier than its popular retelling suggests. It names the executed group primarily as occultists and alchemists, men who had promised the emperor immortality elixirs and failed to deliver them. Confucian scholars appear in the account too, accused alongside the alchemists of slander and forming disloyal cliques. They were not the sole or even the primary target the popular version remembers. What later tradition did was simplify a mixed, fraud-driven scandal into something cleaner and more damning, a purge of intellectuals specifically for their ideas. No mass graves have been found. No contemporary inscription corroborates the traditionally cited figure of 460 people, despite extensive excavation across the region where the event supposedly took place. At least one modern historian has gone further, describing the episode as substantially half-faked history. A real policy of book destruction, in this reading, fused in later memory with an execution narrative that was fabricated or badly exaggerated. None of this means the story stopped mattering. Whatever actually happened at that site, the tale of buried scholars became a foundational warning in later Chinese political memory. It was a cautionary story invoked for centuries whenever a ruler seemed to be silencing intellectual life. Its power in the tradition never depended on resolving every detail. But the vivid specifics people repeat today, a banquet scene, a precise death toll, individual scholars pleading for their lives, belong to storytelling built on top of history. They do not belong to the historical record itself. One event survives in something close to its own administrative language. The other survives only in a single retelling, written a century later by someone with every reason to make the fallen dynasty look as monstrous as possible. Two very different evidentiary standards, wearing one popular phrase, burning books and burying scholars. This is a mechanism the story of ancient China will keep returning to. That mechanism reaches even a reigning sovereign. The two earliest, most authoritative histories of China already call her the ruler. It took centuries for anyone to disagree. Both texts give her a chapter in the format reserved for a reigning sovereign, the basic annals. It is the same structure used for every emperor before and after her, the format court historians reserved for whoever actually sat above the whole court. It was not a courtesy title, and it was not a diplomatic softening of the truth. It was the specific category used to record whoever actually held the throne, applied here without hedging or qualification. One of the two histories does not even give her son a separate biography of his own. His reign simply disappears into hers, folded quietly into her own years on the throne. His name reads like a formality attached to her rule, not a rule that had ever belonged to him. For over a decade, by the judgment of the people closest to the events, Empress Lu was not a regent standing quietly behind a boy emperor. She was the government itself, recorded as such by name in the historian's own preferred format for power. Her name was Lu Ji, widow of the Han Dynasty's founding emperor Liu Bang. After his death, she outlived two of her own sons on the throne. She ruled through both of them in turn. In her final years, she dispensed with the pretense entirely and issued edicts under her own authority. The two earliest dynastic histories were written by court historians working within living memory of her reign. They record all of this plainly. They do not soften it into a footnote, and they do not bury it inside a chapter about someone else. They document, without apparent discomfort, a woman who held supreme power in Han longer than most of the emperors seated on either side of her. She exercised that power directly, not through intermediaries standing in for her. Even those two earliest sources cannot agree on why she ruled the way she did, and that disagreement matters as much as their agreement does. One frames her actions as the behavior of a woman genuinely afraid for her own survival and her family's. She is a widow protecting a fragile position inside a court crowded with rivals who would have destroyed her given the chance. The other source recasts the same decade as calculated cruelty. It reads as a clan's naked grab for permanent power, dressed up as necessity. Both accounts were written close to the events, by historians with access to court memory the later tradition would never have. Neither claims she lacked the throne, and neither pretends her rule was somehow unofficial. They only disagree about what was actually in her fear or ambition, and they leave that question open rather than resolved. That disagreement should have been the end of the matter. Two competing readings of one undisputed reign is exactly the kind of interpretive gap history usually leaves standing. Instead, centuries later, a different tradition arrived and rewrote the reign itself, rather than simply arguing about its motives. Song dynasty historians worked under a far stricter Confucian orthodoxy than the Han court had ever enforced or even imagined. They found something in Lu's story that the earlier historians hadn't needed to solve. A woman ruling in her own name, unambiguously, in the record's own preferred format, did not fit their model of how legitimate authority was supposed to work. So they didn't reinterpret her reign. They replaced it. The two child emperors who had nominally occupied the throne during her regency were reassigned as the period's true rulers. Both boys had been installed and entirely controlled by her authority, and neither had governed a single day in his own right. Lu herself was pushed back into a more familiar shape, the scheming regent standing behind the throne rather than sitting on it. It is a tidy correction, and it is the version most people inherit today without ever hearing the alternative. It also required setting aside the two earliest and best-informed histories of the exact period in question. Both had already settled the matter differently, using their own culture's highest form of historical record. This is not quite the same mechanism as a conqueror rewriting the dynasty he has just destroyed. Nobody here defeated Lu in battle or seized her throne by force in the years after her death. The rewriting came much later, from historians who never met her and had no political stake in her downfall. They worked instead from an assumption about what a woman in power was allowed to have actually been. It would happen again, centuries further on, to another woman who did sit on the throne in her own name, no regency fiction required. Wu Zetian would receive the same treatment from the same historiographic instinct. Her own reign would be quietly reassigned to fit a story more comfortable than the one the earliest sources had already told about her too. Her case would become the template for exactly one later correction, applied to exactly one later woman who also ruled openly under her own name. The discomfort that moved the pen was the same discomfort, arriving centuries apart, from historians who had never once needed to meet the woman they were rewriting. Long before any of that later argument began, one moment inside her actual reign shows the crisis was never simply about her character. It was about a rule, named and specific, that predated her entirely. Her husband, Liu Bang, had sealed a promise with his generals in the dynasty's earliest years, an agreement remembered as the Oath of the White Horse. It was sworn among the men who had built the dynasty together, and it was meant to outlast every one of them. Its central clause was blunt. Anyone who was not born a Lu and who nonetheless became a king was to be attacked by the entire realm as a traitor to the founding settlement. A second clause governed who could be ennobled without royal blood. It allowed titles to be granted on the basis of merit rather than birth alone. Enforcement of that second clause loosened as the decades passed. The first clause held. It was meant to hold for the life of the dynasty. When Empress Lu moved to install members of her own Lu clan as kings, she was not simply consolidating power in the way any regent might. She was proposing to break a named, sworn, specific rule. Every official at court would have recognized it instantly for what it was. Chancellor Wang Ling did recognize it, and he said so directly and to her face, citing the oath by name as his objection. This was not a modern historian reading a violation back into the records centuries later. It was a contemporary official standing in the room telling the most powerful person in the empire that she was breaking a law older than her own authority. Wang Ling's objection stayed in the record, and it set the terms for everything that followed his death and hers. When Lu Ji herself died, the succession crisis that followed was not a quiet transfer of power inside the palace. Han loyalists moved openly against the Lu clan, aiming specifically to restore the constitutional settlement Liu Bang had sworn into existence at the dynasty's founding decades earlier. They framed their violence as restoration rather than ambition, an oath finally enforced against exactly the people it had named as traitors from the start. That framing matters. The years after Lu's death were a test of whether the dynasty's founding rules could survive real contact with real power in either direction. Wang Ling had already answered that question once, insisting the rule outranked the person currently sitting above him. The loyalists who moved against the Lu clan answered it a second time with force rather than words. What gets lost inside that story of oaths and armed factions is what her government actually did while she held it. Legal texts pulled from a Han tomb, dated precisely to her years of rule, show an administration engaged in exactly the kind of work court intrigue rarely records. Judicial statutes and ordinances continued to develop under her government. They built on a legal framework a previous chancellor had begun, carried forward by her own officials. Her administration is also credited with agricultural tax relief for ordinary households. It reduced how often people were called up for corvée labor. It rolled back some of the harshest Qin-era laws, the ones that had punished entire families for a single person's crime. None of this reached the court chroniclers with the same urgency as a broken oath or a Lu clan installed as kings. It shaped the daily obligations of people who never appear in either version of her story, the palace intrigue or the constitutional crisis. They paid or were spared according to decisions made quietly, far from either. Chang'an itself, the capital where all of this played out, had been built as a city that made its own population legible to the government ruling it. Roughly 160 separate residential wards divided the city into units small enough for officials to track who lived where. The arrangement turned neighborhood-level surveillance into ordinary administration. Commerce was gathered into a single zone in the city's northwest, a cluster known as the Nine Markets, rather than left to scatter through the streets. Trade could be observed and taxed there in one place, instead of chased down across an entire capital. The palace complexes themselves consumed a striking share of the walled city. It was a physical statement of how much of Chang'an existed to serve the court, rather than the population living around it. Even the outer walls carried the same logic forward into stone. Built in an irregular zigzagging shape, dated to construction between roughly 194 and 190 BCE, they departed from any straight, purely defensive design. Instead, they followed the paths of the Wei and Shui rivers as they curved around the city. The rivers themselves became Chang'an's moats, folded directly into its fortifications. It was a capital built to keep its own population, its trade, and its threats all visible to the throne at once. One later Han ruler would eventually be measured against Qin's collapse too, and unlike most of the others, he said so himself. Emperor Wu came to the throne decades after Lu's death, inheriting a court, a capital, and an administrative machine already built for scale. He used all three to fund something Han had never attempted before, sustained war against the Xiongnu on the northern frontier. War of that length required money the existing tax base could not reliably supply. Between 119 and 117 BCE, his government nationalized the salt and iron industries. What had been private trades became direct state revenue. Coinage followed soon after, brought under the same central control. The policy reached ordinary salt producers and iron workers directly, folding their livelihoods into a state monopoly they had no say in creating. Merchants who had once profited from those trades lost that footing overnight. The policy stayed contentious enough that it eventually reached the court itself. Decades later, in 81 BCE, it became the subject of a formal debate, preserved in a text remembered as the Discourses on Salt and Iron. Government officials defended the monopoly as fiscal necessity. Confucian critics argued it crushed ordinary producers to pay for a war they had never chosen. Both sides of that argument survive in the record, not as a modern historian's reconstruction. It is the actual language used at the time by the people who lived inside the policy. States extract revenue however they can, and the monopoly alone would not set Emperor Wu apart. What makes his reign unusual is what he did late in his own life. By then, the cost of decades of campaigning had become impossible to ignore, even from the throne. He issued a formal edict of self-criticism, reflecting on his own overreach. The language he chose explicitly evoked Qin's collapse, the same dynasty this whole episode keeps circling back to as a warning. A ruling emperor rarely draws that comparison about himself while he still holds the throne. Later historians would draw it for him without needing to be asked. Emperor Wu had already drawn it first, in his own words, before anyone else could. 2,000 years after any of these arguments were settled, one woman from this same world left behind something different entirely. No oath, no edict, and no court debate could have offered what she left instead. Her name was Lady Dai, and she was buried at Mawangdui in a tomb built with a care that had nothing to do with embalming. Nested coffins were lowered roughly 40 feet underground. Layers of moisture-absorbing charcoal surrounded them, sealed further by packed clay. An acidic liquid was later found pooled directly around the body itself. None of this was designed to preserve her. It was simply engineering, the accidental byproduct of a burial built to keep water and air away from valuable grave goods. For 2,000 years, it worked anyway, and it kept her. When the tomb was opened in 1972, her body had not decomposed the way 2 millennia should have demanded. Pathologists conducting the autopsy found something inside her that no text from this era could have offered on its own. Undigested melon seeds, over 100 of them by most counts, were still lodged in her stomach and her esophagus. Digestion of that kind of seed takes roughly an hour. Working backward from that single fact, pathologists estimated she had died within an hour of eating them. It was a timeline reconstructed not from any written account, but from her own body, still holding the evidence after 2,000 years underground. The examination found more than one final meal. Severe arteriosclerosis had narrowed her arteries. Gallstones sat in her gallbladder. Evidence of parasitic infection turned up as well, the ordinary chronic burdens of a body that had lived a full life before this one afternoon. The most likely cause of death was a heart attack, possibly triggered by a gallstone lodging in her bile duct at the wrong moment. None of it was recorded by any historian writing at the time. All of it was recorded instead by her own body, kept intact by accident long enough for someone to finally read it. No monument was built to remember her, and no text was written to persuade anyone of anything. What survived instead was a body preserved by accident of engineering, melon seeds still in her throat, her last hour reconstructed to the minute. Not every life leaves a body behind to speak for it. A Han court lady with no particular standing waits in Chang'an for a marriage she did not choose. Her name is Wang Zhaojun, and nothing in the record says she was loved or favored or even noticed by the emperor she served. What the record does say is where she is going and why. In the year 33 before the Common Era, a Xiongnu ruler named Huhanye Chanyu rides south into the Han capital and asks for a bride. He has been a Han tributary for almost 20 years by then, since 51 BCE, and this visit is not conquest. It is diplomacy, conducted the way both courts already understood it. A wife sent from the Han court to a steppe ruler is not a gift. It is a treaty made flesh, a bond meant to outlast any single meeting between kings. Wang Zhaojun is chosen, given the title of the Chanyu's principal wife, and sent north out of the only world she has known. Later storytellers will turn her into a singular tragedy, a woman sacrificed alone for the sake of peace. But the practice sending her north already had a name before she ever used it. Heikin, marriage as alliance, had been Han policy for generations. Emperors had been marrying daughters and court women to steppe rulers since the dynasty's early decades, whenever war grew too costly to sustain. Wang Zhaojun is not the origin of this system. She is its most memorable face. For more than a decade afterward, Hu Hanye returns to the Han court peacefully, again and again, rather than raiding its frontier. The marriage cannot claim all the credit for that calm. The Xiongnu Confederation was already fracturing from within, and Hu Hanye had submitted as a tributary years before Wang Zhaojun ever left Chang'an. Still, her marriage sits inside that stretch of quiet, a human instrument placed at the exact point where an existing policy needed a face. Her own voice barely survives in the sources that record her. What survives instead is the shape of the institution around her. Sturdy, well-documented, older than she was. A woman with no standing at court became the visible edge of a policy far larger than her own life. She did nothing but obey, and that obedience alone helped keep two empires from bleeding each other white. "50 years later, a different kind of ambition takes hold of the same throne, and this one does not come from outside the palace walls. Wang Mang has spent decades inside the Han court, rising through marriage ties to the imperial family and a carefully built reputation for Confucian virtue. In the year 9 of the Common Era, he does what no regent before him had managed. He takes the throne outright, ends the Han dynasty by his own hand, and declares a new one called Xin. What Wang Mang wants is not merely power. He believes, or says he believes, that the answer to Han's accumulated problems already exists. It sits preserved whole in classical texts, describing an idealized early Zhou state, centuries gone by then. He does not propose new policy. He proposes restoration, a golden age of shared land and stable coin lifted straight from the page. He means to impose it on an empire that had long since moved on without it. He begins with land. Following the old Wellfield ideal, he orders large private estates broken apart and bans the outright sale of land. The goal is a return to small, equal landholding, the pattern the classical texts describe as natural and just. Wealthy families who had spent generations consolidating estates lose ground overnight, by decree rather than by war. Within about 3 years, faced with elite resistance and gathering famine, Wang Mang reverses the policy entirely. He turns next to money, and here the ambition curdles into something closer to chaos. Wang Mang introduces a bewildering array of new coins and currencies. By some accounts, as many as 28 distinct forms circulate at once, each meant to replace the simple, trusted cash the empire had used for generations. Merchants and officials cannot keep pace with a system that changes faster than they can learn it. Confidence collapses, and across wide stretches of the empire, people abandon coin altogether and return to barter, as if the state's money had simply stopped being real. Nature does not cooperate either. The Yellow River shifts its course more than once during Wang Mang's reign, drowning farmland that had fed entire regions and displacing the people who worked it. Flood arrives on top of confiscation, and confiscation arrives on top of a currency no one trusts. Ordinary landholders and merchants are living through all three at once, a reform program moving faster than the society beneath it can absorb. By the early 2020s, rebellion answers what policy could not fix. The red eyebrows rise in the countryside, joined by Han loyalists who had never accepted the Xin dynasty as legitimate. Wang Mang's government falls, and a member of the old imperial line, Emperor Guangwu, restores the Han name to the throne. 14 years after Wang Mang first took it, the throne returns to the dynasty he had set out to replace. Wang Mang did not fail for lack of conviction. He tried to govern a living empire with a blueprint drawn from a world centuries gone. Land and coin were both remade to match a text rather than the people living under them. The empire beneath him would not hold the shape he pressed onto it. The story most people know about Buddhism's arrival in China begins with a dream. Emperor Ming, the tale goes, sees a golden figure in his sleep. He sends envoys west toward India to learn its meaning, and welcomes monks into Luoyang in the year 67 of the Common Era. It is a clean story, complete with a temple built to house them, White Horse Temple standing as proof. It is also, as far as any contemporary source can confirm, legend rather than event. No writing from Emperor Ming's own reign backs the dream, the envoys, or the arrival date. The account surfaces later, shaped the way founding stories often are, with a ruler's private vision made to explain a religion's public presence. The real, verifiable history of Buddhism reaching China is quieter than that. It arrives roughly 80 years after the legend claims it did, carried not by an emperor's dream, but by one working translator's imperfect choice of words. His name is Shigao, a Parthian monk active in Luoyang from around 148 to 180 CE. He is not a court appointee sent by imperial decree. He is a scholar doing the patient, unglamorous work of rendering Buddhist scripture into a language that had never needed to hold these ideas before. Nirvana, the Buddhist concept of release from suffering and rebirth, has no ready Chinese equivalent waiting for him. And Shigao reaches for the nearest word he has, wu-wei, non-action, a term already carrying centuries of Taoist and Confucian weight. To an audience steeped in Taoist thought, the borrowed word makes an unfamiliar idea legible almost instantly. It is not a precise match. Wu-wei describes an ideal of effortless harmony with the natural order, not release from a cycle of rebirth. The imperfection does not announce itself right away. It becomes visible only in hindsight, once later translators, working with a better grasp of the source texts, need a term that carries less baggage. They drop wu-wei and adopt a direct phonetic transliteration instead, a word borrowed by sound rather than by meaning. And Shigao's choice was a bridge, useful precisely because it was imperfect enough to be replaced. This is how the religion actually enters Chinese thought, through the slow, correctable labor of translation rather than a single dramatic arrival. A foreign concept becomes legible by borrowing the nearest available word, then grows more precise only once. Later scholars notice where that word falls short. By the middle of the 2nd century, the same Han court that received Shigao's translations is losing its grip on something more basic than scripture. A functioning central government is slipping away beneath it. In 169 CE, a purge sweeps through the court, targeting officials named Li Ying and Chen Fan. They and their associates stand accused of forming a dangerous faction. Roughly 100 are killed. A far larger circle is barred from office entirely. Students, relatives, anyone tied to the accused by association rather than action. The ban holds for 15 years. It lifts only in 184, and not out of mercy. The emperor fears the excluded faction might otherwise side with a rebellion already rising in the countryside. That rebellion is built not around court politics, but around a promise of healing. That promise belongs to Zhang Jue, a Taoist healer who has spent roughly a decade building a following across multiple provinces. He sends his own followers out to carry the movement further still. He treats the sick for free while famine, epidemic, and heavy taxation grind the peasantry down under a court dominated by corrupt eunuchs. He tells his followers the Han's blue heaven is dying. A yellow heaven of shared prosperity is rising to replace it, he says, timed to the start of a new 60-year calendrical cycle. His followers mark themselves with yellow cloth tied around their heads, a signal visible from any distance. In the spring of 184, the uprising launches everywhere at once, coordinated across multiple commanderies on the same signal. It drives off or kills local governors and landowners who had never seen resistance organized on this scale. Contemporary sources describe followers numbering in the hundreds of thousands, a figure worth treating as an estimate rather than a precise count. Even allowing for exaggeration, the scale is unlike anything the Han government has faced from below. The imperial response is swift, and in military terms, almost anticlimactic. A comparatively modest combined force meets the rebellion, and within roughly a year, it is over. Zhang Jue dies of illness during the campaign itself. His brothers are killed in battle. By February of the following year, the court declares pacification achieved, though scattered remnants of the movement will persist in pockets for 2 more decades. The bodies are counted. The rebellion is broken. And none of that is what actually ends the Han dynasty. The decisive move happens afterward, in the quiet administrative aftermath rather than on any battlefield. Facing an uprising too vast for the center to manage directly, an advisor urges the emperor toward a single fix. Release direct control of the regional military governors, he says, and let each one respond to the crisis with full local autonomy. The emperor agrees. It solves the immediate emergency completely. The autonomy does not go back afterward. Power handed out in a crisis rarely returns once the crisis passes, and this power does not. Regional generals granted independent military authority to fight a peasant rebellion keep that authority once the peasants are gone. They spend it building personal power bases that outlive the emergency meant to justify them. When the emperor dies in 189, there is no longer a center strong enough to rein those generals back in. The provinces they command have already become, in practice, if not yet in name, kingdoms of their own. Hundreds of thousands had followed a healer who asked for nothing but their faith and promised a fairer world in return. They met mass beheadings in a single ruinous year. And the fix built to save the dynasty outlived the emergency that justified it, one autonomous province at a time. The men who wielded that power were only ever supposed to borrow it for a season. One of those generals never gives his power back. By 196, Cao Cao commands more territory than any rival warlord, but territory alone cannot feed an army. The Yellow Turban Rebellion has been crushed for over a decade, but its wreckage is still walking the roads of northern China. Fields around the city of Xuchang sit empty, their farmers dead, fled, or fighting for whoever pays them next. Cao Cao looks at that emptiness and sees something other than ruin. He sees land waiting for hands, and he already knows exactly whose hands are available. Thousands of former Yellow Turban fighters are wandering the region with nowhere to go, along with refugee families who have lost everything to years of civil war. Cao Cao gathers them, along with captured oxen and farming tools, and resettles them onto that empty land around Xuchang. Some are moved willingly. Others are relocated from hundreds of miles away. Entire households uprooted and placed wherever the state decides grain is needed most. This is not charity. It is the beginning of a system built to feed an army. The system has 2 tracks, and both run on the same logic of state control. Civilian colonies are organized in units of 50 households, farming land the government owns. A family using state-supplied oxen owes 60% of its harvest back to the government. A family working with its own oxen splits the harvest closer to evenly, half for the state, half for itself. Either way, the government eats first. The second track is military. Soldiers farming during peacetime in units of 60 men, then garrisoning the frontier when campaigns resume. Officials running both tracks report straight to the central government, skipping the normal chain of regional administration entirely. That detail matters more than it first appears. Every other warlord fighting for the wreckage of Han territory still depends on regional governors and local strongmen to feed their armies. Those men's loyalty can shift with the season. Cao Cao builds something those rivals don't have, a supply line that answers to him alone. While his enemies are still negotiating with provincial power brokers for grain, his own colonies are already harvesting under direct central command. It gives him something no battlefield victory could, an army that eats regardless of whose territory it happens to be standing on. For the people actually working that land, the arrangement is less a rescue than a quiet form of captivity. Many of these colonists are nominally free, but in practice they cannot simply walk away from the fields they've been assigned. A former Yellow Turban fighter once marched under the promise of a fairer world. Now he works soil he did not choose, under a government he did not choose either. In exchange, he gets the one thing that promise never delivered, enough food to survive another season. It is not slavery. It is not quite freedom. It is what several years of famine and civil war leave behind when the fighting finally, briefly, stops. By the time Cao Cao dies in 220, the system has done exactly what it was built to do. Wei has grain reserves that other successor states can only envy, and an economy stable enough to keep fighting the wars his son will inherit. His son Cao Pi does inherit them. Along with them comes something else his father never fully solved: the question of how to make one warlord's family into a legitimate ruling dynasty. Cao Pi's answer that same year, 220, is not military. It is administrative, and its effects will outlast the Cao family by centuries. A minister at Cao Pi's court proposes a new way of filling government office, called the 9-rank system. Local officials known as rectifiers are appointed in each region, and their job is to grade candidates for office on a scale from 1 to 9. The grading rests on two things: a family's existing reputation and an individual's personal conduct. Whatever grade a rectifier assigns becomes a hard ceiling. A man graded low can rise only so far, no matter how capable he later proves himself to be. On paper, this replaces the informal favor networks of the old Han recommendation system with something that looks orderly, even meritocratic. In practice, the rectifiers doing the grading are themselves local elites, judging the sons of families they already know. Reputation evaluated this way tends to run in the same families generation after generation. A system built to formalize fairness quietly becomes a system built to formalize inheritance instead. Within a single generation, the results are visible enough that people start naming them out loud. A popular saying spreads describing exactly what the 9-rank system has produced: the upper ranks holding no commoners, the lower ranks holding no aristocrats. Officialdom has sorted itself cleanly along family lines, and everyone watching it happen understands what has occurred. A recruitment system meant to identify merit has become the architecture of a closed aristocracy. The 9-rank system does not vanish with the Cao family, or even with the Three Kingdoms period that made it necessary. It persists through the Jin dynasty that follows, and through the fractured southern and northern dynasties after that. For over 3.5 centuries, it quietly sorts families into rank. Only after 587 does this older machinery finally get dismantled. That is when the Sui dynasty introduces an examination system open in principle to talent rather than bloodline. Even then, the aristocratic class it built does not disappear along with the system that made it. What survives from this period, then, is not really the story people remember. The Three Kingdoms era lives on in popular imagination as 3 warlords and their generals, a story of battles, betrayals, and oaths sworn in peach gardens. But grain fields farmed by former rebels shaped the centuries that followed more than any single battle. So did a grading scale meant to rank a man's worth by his father's name. An empire was breaking apart into war. What its rulers built instead, almost as an afterthought, was the machinery future dynasties would spend generations trying to take apart again. The Cao family's dynasty does not outlast the aristocracy it helped create. By 265, Wei has been swallowed from within by the Jin dynasty. Its new ruling house is built from the same graded families the 9-rank system had spent decades favoring. Jin briefly reunites the old Han territory, and for a moment it looks as though the fracturing might finally be over. Then, in July of 311, the fracturing returns with a violence the earlier collapse never matched. Xiongnu-led Hanzhao forces reach Luoyang, the Jin capital, and take it. The city falls in the wake of an internal Jin catastrophe already underway, a succession struggle among Jin princes known as the War of the 8 Princes. That struggle had spent years hollowing out the dynasty's own defenses before any outside army arrived. What follows is not a conquest that spares the losers for later use. The Han Zhao army kills the Jin crown prince, kills a host of ministers, and kills more than 30,000 civilians inside the city walls. They burn the palaces afterward, and then they dig up the Jin imperial mausoleums, denying the dynasty even its dead. 5 years later, in 316, Chang'an falls in a follow-up collapse, and Western Jin rule in the north ends completely. This is the moment history remembers as the disaster of Yongjia, and the name understates what actually happened. It was not one bad defeat in a long war. It was the north itself becoming ungovernable, its capital cities gutted, its imperial line broken at the root. Whoever intends to call themselves the legitimate government of China after this has to do it somewhere else. Luoyang and Chang'an no longer offer any foundation left to build on. Surviving Jin loyalists find that somewhere else south of the Yangtze River, a distant clansman of the imperial family leads the regrouping. In 317, he founds the Eastern Jin at Jiankang on the site of what is now Nanjing. Two of the most prominent clans among the fleeing elite help establish this new southern court, lending it whatever legitimacy survives the journey. People at the time have a phrase for what has just happened to their world. They call it robes and caps moving south, a description of the scholar official class fleeing with whatever dignity travel allows. The phrase makes it sound like a procession. The reality is closer to a flood. Beyond the dead left behind in Luoyang, the roads south are choked with famine. Wartime chaos in the north brings documented cases of people eating people among refugee and bandit populations alike. It is not a detail the record dwells on, and it does not need dwelling on. One line carries the weight of it well enough. Whatever else this migration is, it begins in conditions bad enough that starvation and violence had already become ordinary before anyone crossed the river. Later government records allow historians to put a number on how many people actually made that crossing successfully. Roughly 1 million northerners relocate south in these waves of migration. That figure comes to about 1/6 of the entire registered population the southern regime already governs. That is not a wave of refugees absorbed quietly into existing towns. That is a population increase large enough to break whatever administrative system was built to count people in the first place. And it does break it immediately. The Eastern Jin cannot simply redraw its maps to fit 1 million new residents. So it invents new maps instead, prefectures, commanderies and counties bearing the names of the northern homelands their residents had lost. A refugee from a lost county near Luoyang could find himself resettled in a southern prefecture carrying that same county's old name. It was a piece of administrative fiction built to make an uprooted population feel, on paper at least, like it had never quite left home. Officials also create 2 separate household registries, a yellow paper register for native southerners and a white paper register for the newly arrived. The white register carries a real benefit attached to it, exemption from certain taxes and labor duties, granted because everything these refugees owned back home was already gone. That benefit comes with a quieter cost. Being registered differently means being marked differently. For at least a generation, the elite families who fled Luoyang and Chang'an remain visibly, administratively separate from the southerners around them. arrival is not the same as belonging. A man can survive the sack of his capital and cross a river with his household intact. He can still spend the rest of his life carrying paperwork that identifies him as someone who came from somewhere else. His children may inherit the same white register and the same standing outside the community whose land they now share. The Eastern Jin never resolves this by pretending the North and South are one population again. It resolves it by governing them as two, on the same soil, under the same throne, filed under different colored paper. What the Celestial Masters had already done a century earlier in Hanzong, the Eastern Jin now does at empire scale. Zhanglu's theocracy in the West had built its own libationers, its own parishes, its own registries. It was a functioning government assembled out of religious conviction rather than imperial mandate. The lesson in both cases is the same. When central authority collapses, the people left standing do not invent something new to replace it. They rebuild the shape of a state, registries and all, because that shape is the only tool anyone alive still knows how to use. Farther north, a different successor state is rebuilding the same shape in stone. The Northern Wei dynasty rules over a mostly Han population, but its ruling house is Xianbei, a steppe people. The Han they govern still regard them, in some quiet way, as outsiders wearing the emperor's robes. Between 460 and 465, the Northern Wei court sponsors an answer to that quiet doubt. It is carved directly into a cliff face outside the capital at Pingcheng. The excavated Buddha at Cave 20 alone stands roughly 13.5 meters tall. Together with 4 others, it forms a set history remembers as the Tanyao 5, named for the monk who oversaw their carving. The monk himself is not incidental to what these caves are. Tanyao holds the formal title of Superintendent of Monks, appointed directly by the Northern Wei Emperor to plan and supervise the excavation. That appointment follows something the dynasty would rather people forgot. A period of state persecution against Buddhism between 446 and 452. Monasteries were destroyed and monks driven from their orders on imperial order. The persecution had been the previous emperor's policy, not this one's. But the damage to Buddhism's standing in the north did not simply end because the throne changed hands. The Tanyao caves are among the first acts of religious atonement the court sponsors once that persecution ends. Building monuments to the very faith it had recently tried to erase becomes the dynasty's way of proving the persecution had passed for good. It was a visible, permanent apology, carved where no one could miss it. Scholars have long noticed something specific about the 5 faces staring out from the cliff. Each one is thought to be carved in the likeness of one of the 5 emperors who came before. The resemblance is too consistent across the caves to read as coincidence, equating the ruling line's founders directly with the eternal figure carved above them. That resemblance is not decoration. Art historians studying the caves in recent years argue that Northern Wei clergy actively taught something remarkable about the man on the throne. The emperor, this teaching held, should be venerated as the Buddha Maitreya already arrived among his people in human form. Under that belief, a colossal stone Buddha carved with an emperor's face is not simply a devotional image. It is a claim, carved at towering scale, that the ruler and the divine are the same presence occupying the same body. The scale itself is the argument. A subject standing at the base of one of these Buddhas does not experience quiet contemplation. They experience being physically dwarfed, made small on purpose by a stone face wearing the features of the dynasty that rules them. That was never an accident of ambitious art. It was the whole design, or built directly into the sculptor's proportions. Neither the emperor nor the monastic establishment builds this alone. The throne needs religious legitimacy. It cannot manufacture through conquest, and the Buddhist clergy needs imperial protection and funding it cannot secure through faith alone. Each side gets exactly what it needs from the other, carved permanently into a mountainside neither of them will live to see finished. Carving that mountainside costs years of labor from skilled and unskilled workers alike, cut directly into rock under state and religious direction together. It was a massive and sustained mobilization of craftsmen and quarry hands, answering to religious and political authority at once. None of that labor appears in the finished caves themselves. A dynasty descended from horsemen and raiders had found a way to make its foreign face look, to its own hand subjects, like the face of heaven. And Chang'an is only the opening move. When the court later shifts its capital again, it will carve the same argument into a second mountain, larger and better documented than the first. Stone alone does not hold an empire together forever, and the Northern Wei court knows it. 2 generations after Chang'an is carved, Emperor Zhaowen inherits a throne built by conquest. He begins trying to make it look, in every visible respect, indistinguishable from a native Chinese one. His grandmother, Empress Dowager Feng, had spent the 1480s already laying groundwork as his regent. She redistributed land under a new system and reformed local governance long before he ever took full personal rule. What Zhaowen builds on that foundation, once the throne is fully his, is not incremental. It is total, touching everything from the language spoken at court to the very ground the capital stands on. He orders the Tuoba aristocracy to adopt Chinese surnames in place of their steppe names, severing, at least on paper, a lineage those families had carried for generations. He mandates Chinese as the court language for anyone under 30, effectively deciding an entire younger generation's native tongue by decree. He requires Han dress at court and encourages intermarriage between Xianbei and Han families, blending the two populations at exactly the level of society most visible to observers. In 494, he moves the capital itself away from Pingcheng and its steppe associations to Luoyang, the old heartland of Chinese imperial legitimacy. Every piece of this program points toward the same calculation. A small Xianbei ruling class governing an overwhelmingly larger Han population cannot survive indefinitely by being seen as conquerors. It has to be seen as legitimately, unmistakably Chinese. At the glittering new court in Luoyang, that strategy works exactly as intended. Xianbei nobles who embrace Sinicization gain real access to a Han cultural and administrative world respected across the wider Chinese sphere. It is a currency of prestige no steppe title had ever offered them. It opens marriages, offices, and a kind of standing their grandfathers could not have imagined holding in a Chinese court. but legitimacy purchased at the center has to be paid for somewhere. The bill comes due hundreds of miles to the north at a chain of frontier outposts called the Six Garrisons. Those garrisons had once meant status. Xianbei soldiers stationed there had defended the dynasty's original steppe frontier against raiders, and their military role had earned them real standing within a still nomadic ruling culture. Sinicization changes what standing means without asking the garrison's permission. Wealth and opportunity concentrate in the sinicizing south, while garrison officers find themselves locked out of the higher positions now reserved for insiders at the Luoyang court. Forbidden to migrate their herds south, stranded hundreds of miles from land that once sustained them, they had once been the dynasty's most valued soldiers. Now they became its most visibly neglected. For the reformers who stayed close to Luoyang, this was never how the story was supposed to feel. Sinicization opened doors, prestige, marriage into respected Han families, a foothold in a wider Chinese world that had once been closed to them entirely. For the garrisons left behind, the same policy read as abandonment. A court that had once depended on their swords now treated them as an embarrassing relic of where the dynasty used to come from. One reform program, aimed at making an entire ruling ethnicity look legitimately Chinese, ends up dividing that ethnicity into people it elevates and people it quietly discards. The conventional story blames what happens next entirely on that neglect. It treats the Six Garrisons revolt of 523 as a straightforward case of ethnic backlash against cultural erasure. Proud soldiers in that reading simply turned on a court that had abandoned its own steppe roots. Historians today read the evidence differently. A drought-driven famine in 523 sharpens tensions already running along a different line entirely. It is not simply Xianbei against a sinicizing court, but garrison elites against the impoverished lower-ranking soldiers and settlers serving beneath them. Officers who still held rank and privilege inside the garrisons found themselves resented by their own men just as bitterly as either group resented Luoyang. Raiding born of hunger spills into internal uprising. The revolt that follows spreads across ethnic lines the old story assumed were solid, drawing fighters who are Xianbei, Han, Gaoche, and Xiongnu alike into the same rebellion. That spread itself argues against a purely ethnic reading, since men from every side of the supposed divide end up fighting on the same side of this one. They were bound together less by blood than by hunger and exclusion. Whatever exactly ignites it, the revolt burns for roughly a decade, spreading from garrison to garrison faster than any single court response can contain it. By 534, the Northern Wei dynasty has fractured permanently into rival successor states, unable to survive what began as unrest at its own forgotten edge. Sinicization did not, on its own, cause that collapse. It built a court so successful at winning legitimacy in the south that it stopped noticing what it was losing on its own frontier. A single reform program had created winners inside the palace and losers, hundreds of miles away, among the very people the dynasty most needed to keep loyal. Not every response to political danger in this age involves building an institution at all. Some men choose the opposite. Just outside the crumbling Wei court, a different kind of survival strategy takes shape in a bamboo grove near a scholar's country estate. 7 men gather there through the middle of the 3rd century, drinking, playing music, and talking through the night. They deliberately avoid the court ceremony and official careers most educated men of their standing would have spent a lifetime chasing. History remembers them as the 7 sages of the bamboo grove. Their withdrawal looks on the surface like pure eccentric charm, wine cups and zithers and conversation stretching past dawn. It is also something more calculated than that. The Sima family is engaged in a slow, methodical takeover of the Cao Wei throne. Each step of that takeover is dressed in exactly the Confucian language of virtue and duty the dynasty had always used to claim legitimacy. Retreating from court life is not simply an aesthetic preference for these 7 men. It is a way of refusing to participate in a performance they no longer believe in. It is also a way of surviving a transition that has already proven dangerous for anyone standing too close to power. One of them refuses more loudly than the rest. Shang writes directly against the Sima family's claim to virtue. He argues that men now treating Confucian classics as sacred had only ever treated them as useful, discarded the moment they stopped serving the pursuit of power. That argument stays confined to philosophy and private correspondence for a while. It does not stay there forever. Shang's friend Lu An is imprisoned on charges Shang believes are fabricated. Shang testifies in his friend's defense, and that testimony is enough to see him imprisoned as well. There is also an old grudge working against him now, an official Shang had once treated with open public contempt. That official offers the regent Sima Zhao his advice on what should happen next. Acting on that advice, Sima Zhao orders Shang's execution in 262. Word of the sentence spreads through the scholarly world faster than the court expects. Some 3,000 scholars sign a petition seeking his release, an extraordinary show of collective standing behind one condemned man. It changes nothing. The appeal is denied, and the execution proceeds as ordered. It is a plain demonstration that even overwhelming cultural prestige offers no real shelter once a regime decides withdrawal itself counts as defiance. What the execution actually proves runs deeper than one man's fate. Opting out of politics had always looked to the Sima regime like exactly what it was, a judgment on their legitimacy delivered by silence rather than speech. A man did not need to raise an army or write a manifesto to be read as an enemy. He only needed to refuse, visibly and consistently, to pretend their claim to virtue was real. Not every sage pays that price. Ruanji survives the same transition by choosing the opposite performance. He cultivates a public reputation for constant drunkenness and erratic behavior, until the court simply stops taking him seriously enough to fear. Where Shang confronted the regime with open moral argument, Ruanji disappears behind a mask of harmlessness, and the mask works. 2 men, the same danger, the same small circle of friends gathered under the same bamboo canopy, and only one walks away. On the day of his execution, Shang does not rage against the sentence or plead for further mercy. He looks instead at the sun, still high enough in the sky to measure the hour remaining to him, and asks for something else entirely. Someone brings him his zither. He tunes it there in front of the assembled crowd, unhurried, and begins to play a piece the court would come to know as his swan song. Each note arrives exactly where he intended it, until there are no notes left. A single musician's composure could not save the age he lived in, and division does not end quietly either. It ends the way it always seems to end here, with a state that rebuilds the shape of the empire it replaced. This time the shape is a canal, so costly in forced labor it topples the dynasty that dug it. Emperor Yang of Sui begins his great project around the year 605, and the ambition behind it is simple enough to state in a sentence. China's grain grows in the south, along the Yangtze and the Huai, but its armies and its throne sit in the drier north. No road network built by hand could move enough rice fast enough to feed a capital or supply a war. Water could, if enough of it could be made to run in the right direction. Pieces of canal already existed, dug in fragments over the preceding 11 centuries, but Yang's engineers link them into something genuinely new. They connect 4 separate river systems, the Hai, the Yellow, the Huai, and the Yangtze, into one continuous waterway running the length of the empire. Later dynasties keep extending it, and by the 13th century the whole system stretches some 1,100 miles. Grain moves north on it first. Troops follow, and after them tax revenue, official mail, and the ordinary traffic of a government trying to hold a vast territory together through its rivers. In purely engineering terms, the canal does exactly what it was built to do. What it costs to build is far harder to pin down than what it accomplishes. Villages and counties across the empire receive labor quotas, and households that fail to meet them face punishment. Few risk falling short. The surviving estimates for how many people were conscripted range from roughly 3 million to 5.5 million. Most were men between about 15 and 60 years old, though some records note women and children pressed into support roles alongside them. Death toll estimates for the primary construction phase, the years around 605 to 610, run from the hundreds of thousands into the low millions. No two sources agree closely enough to offer one number worth trusting. What every account agrees on instead is the shape of the thing, not the count. The workers who dug the canal left nothing behind in their own words. Everything known about their conscription, their conditions, their deaths, comes down through the administrators who counted them, not the people who were counted. Officials who criticize the human cost of the project are not thanked for their honesty. They are punished for raising it, which says more about what the court already knew than any surviving report ever states outright. The canal rises out of a labor force whose suffering survives only as a rounding error in someone else's account of a successful reign. It is this cost, more than any single military defeat, that brings the Sui dynasty down within a generation of finishing its greatest achievement. A government that could organize millions of hands to move earth across 4 river basins could not survive the resentment that organizing produced. Sui falls, and falls quickly. But the canal it built does not fall with it. Later dynasties, Yuan, Ming, Qing, extend and rebuild the system rather than let it silt over. The logistical problem it solved never goes away simply because the throne changes hands. By the time of the Yuan, the network has grown into 3 connected parts. The original Sui-Tang Canal, the newer Beijing-Hangzhou stretch, and the eastern Zhejiang Canal further south, all still doing the same original work. In 2014, UNESCO formally recognizes the whole system as a World Heritage Site. By then, it has already been moving grain and cargo along its channels for close to 1400 years. Most monuments from this period survive today as ruins people walk through and photograph. This one still carries boats. The dynasty that replaces Sui inherits the canal, the road network, and a capital already old by the time the new dynasty's name is attached to it. Tang China takes the city of Chang'an and turns it into something the classical world has no real precedent for. Around the year 750, period records call it, without much modesty, a million-man city. Modern estimates are more careful, and the careful version is still extraordinary on its own terms. The population living inside Chang'an's walls likely runs between 800,000 and 1 million people. A census taken in the year 742 counts nearly 2 million residents across the wider metropolitan province, spread over roughly 363,000 households. Historians studying the surrounding farmland now judge that the region could have fed and supported close to 2 million people in total. No other city on Earth at that moment holds anywhere near that many people behind one set of walls. The walls themselves enclose about 84 square kilometers, larger than the island of Manhattan. Inside them, the city is cut into a grid of roughly 110 separately walled residential wards. Each ward keeps its own curfew hours. For much of the early Tang period, ordinary buying and selling is confined to 2 officially designated marketplaces sealed off from where people actually live. A merchant cannot simply open a shop beneath his own roof. Even the palace grounds inherited from earlier dynasties reflect this scale of ambition. The old Huayang Palace site alone covers some 4.5 square kilometers, nearly 7 times the footprint of Beijing's later Forbidden City. It is finally demolished under the early Tang. Over the following century, the rigid separation between home and market slowly breaks down as commerce spills past the marketplace gates into the residential wards around it. For the city's first generations, though, geography and law keep home and trade in strictly separate rooms. Chang'an sits at the eastern end of the Silk Road. Its cosmopolitan character is not an accident of geography so much as a deliberate feature of how the city is run. A Persian bazaar operates within the walls, stocked with goods suited to tastes formed a continent away in Iran. Travelers and long-term residents arrive from India, from the Arabian Peninsula, from the Iranian plateau, even from the East African coast. The court does not uniformly welcome them. Some officials express open unease about foreigners settling permanently rather than simply passing through and moving on. But no reliable record anywhere supports the popular claim of 1 million foreign residents living inside the city walls. What the record actually preserves is narrower and in its way more convincing. Specific goods change hands, named communities with known origins, real people traceable to real places. Not a round number invented to sound impressive to a listener centuries later. Chang'an, for all its size, produces comparatively little of what it consumes day to day. It functions as what historians call a consumer city. Its enormous population is sustained not by manufacturing or by export trade, but by its role as the seat of imperial government and military command. Grain arrives from the south on Yang's Canal, still doing the work it was built for a century earlier. Revenue arrives from provinces whose residents will never see the capital they help feed. The city's true output is administration itself. Everything else, food, cloth, coins, silk for the court's own use, is drawn inward to sustain the city. Its population's daily labor is running an empire, not manufacturing the goods that keep it alive. Within those walled walls, under those nightly curfews, the city becomes the stage for everything that follows. A concubine enters that stage first, as almost nobody, one woman among many attending Emperor Taizong's court in a role with no real path to power. She becomes a favored consort of his son and successor, Emperor Gaozong. When Gaozong dies in 683, she rules as Empress regent in the name of her sons. 7 years later, she takes a step no woman in Chinese history had taken before her. In 690, she crowns herself emperor in her own right, not empress. She founds her own dynasty. Rather than governing quietly behind a throne, she does not sit on herself. She reigns until a palace coup forces her abdication in 705. By then, she is the only woman in the whole of Chinese history to have reigned as emperor in her own name. What survives of her reign comes almost entirely from 2 dynastic histories, and both were written generations after her death by Confucian scholar officials. For men of that class and training, a woman ruling in her own right was not simply unusual. It was a violation of the order they believed governed heaven and earth alike. Both surviving accounts foreground her cruelty, her sexual conduct, and her manipulation of the men around her. One 11th century chronicle carries its author's own political and religious commitments through nearly every page. Its treatment of her Buddhist patronage reads less like a record than a reckoning. None of this means she ruled gently. Her regime used informants, denunciation, and coerced confession against political rivals, chancellors, and members of her own family. But the same violence, committed by a male emperor, is usually written into the histories as necessary statecraft. It becomes a cost of governing, rather than a stain on his character. Set beside those histories, her purges are described in far more gruesome, morally weighted language. This asymmetry is not unique to her. It shows up in the historical treatment of other vilified female rulers across Chinese history. This is a pattern in how Confucian historiography handled women in power, not a grudge against one particular woman. Read against that pattern, her substantive record looks different too. Her reign delivers sustained political stability and competent bureaucratic administration for years at a stretch. She deliberately expands the imperial examination system. It becomes a way to build a body of officials loyal to her, rather than to the aristocratic clans who had run the old Tang establishment for generations. The historians who inherited the record of her reign belonged to exactly the class she had threatened and displaced. It is difficult to separate their judgment of her cruelty from what her rule had cost people like them. That examination system deserves its own reckoning because its reputation as pure meritocracy hides just how brutal the actual odds were. The category that becomes the Jinshi degree is first established back in 605 under Sui Emperor Yang. The whole apparatus predates the Tang dynasty by decades, even though Tang is where it reaches its greatest prestige. Emperor Taizong formalizes the system into 6 regular categories of civil examination administered through the Ministry of Rites. Over time, one category pulls ahead of the rest. The Jinshi degree, the presented scholar, becomes the most coveted of all. It grows demanding enough that sometime between 730 and 740, the court adds a requirement to compose original poetry. That comes on top of everything else a candidate already had to master. The general classics examinations pass somewhere between 10 and 20% of candidates in a given year, difficult by any ordinary standard. The Jinshi degree sits in an entirely different category of difficulty. Out of a candidate pool running 1,000 or more in any year the examination is offered, only 1 to 2% succeed. Across the entire span of the Tang dynasty, only 6,585 people ever earn the Jinshi degree. That works out to roughly 23 successful candidates a year in an empire counted in the tens of millions. Wu Zetian's reign marks a real turning point for this system, and not by accident. Every Tang ruler before her had been a male member of the imperial family. Governing through the same entrenched aristocratic clans, the examinations were slowly beginning to challenge. Reshaping the examinations becomes central to her own strategy for building a new elite answerable to her personally. Under her reign, the court introduces both a palace examination and a military examination, widening the paths into government service beyond the old classical track. From 702 onward, examinee names are concealed from the examiners grading their work. It is a direct reform against a practice that had let candidates submit writing samples to examiners in advance, currying favor before the exam even began. By the 9th century, 3 out of every 5 Grand Chancellors hold the Jinshi degree. A hereditary nobility's grip on power loosens visibly, one examination hall at a time. The woman later remembered as a monster is the one who set that loosening in motion. Behind the statistics sits a very ordinary human cost, the kind Chinese folklore never stopped preserving. Repeated failure across a lifetime is common enough that nobody considers it strange. Some candidates keep sitting the examination well into old age, refusing to let go of the one path they had trained for since boyhood. Grandfathers, fathers, and sons are recorded taking the same test together in the same sitting, 3 generations chasing the same handful of slots in the same year. For the rare few who pass the Jinshi track, the reward is real: admission to the prestigious Hanlin Academy and a direct road into senior government service. For everyone else, year after year of failure converts a lifetime of preparation into disgrace rather than advancement. A candidate's family had often sacrificed to fund his years of study, so his failure was rarely felt as his alone. In the more extreme accounts, that shame is heavy enough to drive a failed candidate to suicide rather than face his family again. Outside the palace and the examination halls, in a different corner of the empire entirely, a much quieter kind of evidence waits behind a wall. Cave 17 sits inside the wider Mogao grottos. The complex holds roughly 500 caves, carved by hand into a cliff face near the Dunhuang Oasis out on the Silk Road in Gansu Province. This particular cave becomes known as the Library Cave, and what it holds says as much about Tang religious life as any imperial edict. Sometime in the 11th century, someone seals an annex inside it. Tens of thousands of manuscripts and printed texts disappear behind a plastered wall, for reasons scholars still debate. The cave stays sealed and forgotten for roughly 900 years, until a Taoist monk finds it again in 1900. What he finds is not a single tidy library, but a working multilingual archive built up over centuries. The manuscripts inside date from roughly the 4th century to the 11th. The great majority are written in Chinese and Tibetan. But smaller, genuine bodies of material survive in Khotanese, in Turkic, in Sanskrit, and in Sogdian as well. No Hebrew language material appears among the tens of thousands of items, whatever claims have sometimes circulated beyond the collection itself. The Chinese language material alone totals some 58,000 manuscripts. About 95% of that is Buddhist religious literature. The rest ranges widely: Taoist classical texts, works from the traditional 4 categories of Chinese scholarship, popular literature, and medical texts that preserve prescriptions otherwise lost to time. Among those 58,000 Chinese manuscripts sits one especially telling object. It is a hymn scroll, written in Chinese but composed for Manichaean worship, a Persian-founded religious tradition distinct from both Buddhism and the Church of the East. It survives today in the British Library. 2 of the early 20th century expeditions that reached the cave carried much of it away. The collection ended up divided between institutions that still hold pieces of it today. Chiefly the British Library and British Museum on one side, the Bibliothèque Nationale de France on the other. That single scroll captures, in miniature, what the whole cave demonstrates at scale. Dunhuang was never simply a way station where Buddhism passed through on its route into China. It was a genuine crossroads where separate religious communities kept their own scriptures, copied in their own languages, for their own local worship. All of it sat within reach of the same cliff face, waiting behind the same wall. This same pattern of religious plurality reaches all the way to the capital itself, documented in an entirely different kind of object. In 635, a church of the East missionary named Alopan arrives in Chang'an, and the imperial court receives him with genuine formality. Emperor Taizong sends his own prime minister to escort Alopan into the city. His scriptures are translated in the imperial library, and the emperor studies the material personally before issuing an edict. That edict, in 638, formally approves the religion's propagation and the building of a monastery. Nearly everything known about Alopan comes from a single limestone monument, the Chang'an stele. It is erected 146 years after his arrival and buried not long after that. The stele is lost for nearly 8 centuries before its rediscovery in the 17th century during the late Ming Dynasty. Its surviving text is selective in a telling way. It summarizes creation, humanity's fall, the incarnation, and the road to salvation, borrowing vocabulary from Buddhist and Taoist thought to make the ideas legible to a Chinese reader. It says nothing at all about the crucifixion or the resurrection. Between the sealed cave at Dunhuang and the buried stele at Chang'an, the same century of Tang history keeps turning up the same kind of story. A religious tradition arrives, is welcomed, and is formally recorded by the state that welcomed it. Then, for reasons its own believers could not have predicted, that record is hidden underground. It waits there until someone else, centuries later, is ready to find it. Alopen himself survives nowhere else. No independent biography, no surviving letter, nothing from the Church of the East's own archives to confirm the Stell's account of him. The entire human story of Christianity's first documented missionary to China rests on one stone monument. It happened to be buried instead of destroyed, and happened to be dug up again nearly 800 years later. Chang'an's religious traffic runs in both directions, and the most famous traveler to leave the city does not arrive from somewhere else. He departs from it illegally, chasing a problem that has nothing to do with adventure. By 629, a Buddhist monk named Xuanzang has grown troubled by something in his own tradition's texts. The Chinese translations of Buddhist scripture available to him contradict each other in ways his own teachers cannot resolve, no matter how carefully he asks the question. He decides the only real fix is to go to the source itself. He will travel to India and study the Sanskrit originals directly, rather than trust one more layer of imperfect translation. The timing could hardly be worse. Tang China is at war with the Eastern Turkic Khaganate, and Emperor Taizong has banned foreign travel outright. Xuanzang has already asked for permission to make the journey. The emperor has already refused him. He goes anyway. Sympathetic Buddhist border guards let him slip past the frontier. From there he crosses the Gobi Desert alone, without a guide, carrying nothing but what a single traveling scholar could manage on his own back. What happens next surprises him. Local rulers across Central Asia, hearing of his scholarship, do not treat him as a fugitive fleeing a ban. They supply him with escorts, with funds, with letters of introduction to carry him further along his route. He crosses the Hindu Kush and reaches northern India around 630. For the next several years, he moves between Indian cities and centers of Buddhist learning, keeping careful notes the entire way. In 637, he finally reaches Nalanda, the preeminent center of Buddhist scholarship anywhere in the world at that time. Its student body numbers in the many thousands. He stays there for years. Sources disagree on exactly how many, somewhere between 2 and 5, mastering Sanskrit and debating Hindu Brahmin scholars on their own terms. He specializes in the philosophy known as consciousness only, one of the more demanding schools of Buddhist thought taught at Nalanda. It is not enough for Xuanzang simply to attend lectures and absorb what other scholars have already concluded. He argues, tests his positions publicly, and earns a reputation serious enough to reach the ear of the region's ruling powers. He wins a public debate before the ruler of most of northern India, a ruler impressed enough to ask Xuanzang to remain permanently at his court. Xuanzang declines. He had never intended to stay, and the return journey home begins. He arrives back in Chang'an in the first month of 645, 16 years after slipping past the border guards who let him leave. Along the way, he has covered something like 50,000 li, roughly 10,000 miles, and visited more than 100 separate kingdoms. His journey has not been free of danger. Sandstorms and bandit attacks punctuate the record, along with recurring fever crossing the high, thin air of the Pamir Mountains. On at least one occasion, traveling companions vanish with part of his cargo, leaving him to press on with whatever survives the theft. But the through line of the historical record, as distinct from the legend later built on top of it, is scholarly persistence rather than combat or the supernatural. Xuanzang spends the bulk of his 16 years abroad in sustained study, in debate, in the patient keeping of notes. His own travel record becomes, in its own right, a primary historical source for understanding 7th century Central and South Asia. Later scholars cite it for details no other surviving text preserves. Emperor Taizong, who had refused Xuanzang's request to leave and banned his departure outright, does not punish him for defying that ban. He grants him full amnesty for the illegal departure 16 years earlier. He organizes a lavish state welcome for the monk, who once left the empire as a criminal. A monk returns after 16 years and 10,000 miles, not with monsters defeated, but with manuscripts and an emperor's forgiveness. The empire that forgave Xuanzang was still the most magnetic place on earth, a capital that other kingdoms tried to copy stone for stone. That was Chang'an a little over a century before a mid-level official in his mid-40s came to stand in it and barely recognize what he saw. Du Fu knows this city. He has walked these streets before, back when Chang'an held 1 million people inside its walls and envoys from a dozen kingdoms passed through its gates. Now rebel banners hang over the palace, and the spring grass is climbing through the paving stones where the crowds used to be. He had tried to reach the emperor. When An Lushan's rebels took Chang'an in the year 756, Xuanzong's court fled west, and Du Fu tried to follow it. He sent his wife somewhere safer first, then set out alone toward the road the court had taken. Rebel soldiers caught him before he got far and brought him back into the city he had just tried to leave. He spent the following months a prisoner without a cell, free to walk a capital that no longer behaved like one. In the spring of 757, he wrote the poem history would remember him for. Spring View, 4 lines built entirely from what stood in front of him. A country broken, its capital still standing. Grass and trees growing thick where there used to be order. He was not describing ruin from a distance. He was standing inside it. What makes Du Fu's account different from a battle report is what he chooses to notice. Not troop movements, not the rebel command structure. A flower that makes him weep, a bird that startles him into thinking of his own scattered family. He did not know if his wife and children were safe. He did not know if the exiled court would ever call him back. Later readers gave his wartime poems a name, Poetic History. No chronicle from the throne room captures what this felt like the way his 4 lines do. He was a man who knew this city's markets and gardens by heart, not a general watching armies converge on a map. He watched them go quiet under rebel occupation, worried mostly about people he loved and could not reach. Du Fu was not alone in sensing that something had already gone wrong long before the rebellion made it undeniable. Decades earlier, at the height of Tang's confidence, a different group of poets had been writing from the empire's other edge. The frontier garrisons strung out along the Silk Road, and their verse carried its own quiet warning. Wang Changling, Gao Shi, and Sen Shen wrote what came to be called frontier poetry, and it did not read like triumph. Sen Shen served on the staff of a frontier military governor. His lines carry the cold of an actual outpost rather than an imagined one. Frozen rivers. Wind that cuts through armor. Soldiers' bones left where they fell, unburied in the sand. This genre reached its height in the first half of the 8th century, the era of Tang's greatest military confidence and expansion. That timing matters. The doubt in these poems was not hindsight. It ran alongside the triumph, not after it. The poems return again and again to the same soldier, marched impossibly far from home with no date set for his return. A wife in Chang'an waits for a husband and has no way of knowing what frontier duty actually costs him. Scholars now read some of Wang Changling's frontier verse as an early culturally sanctioned form of anti-war poetry. The same culture that produced it was still celebrating the wars these soldiers were dying in. So the unease came first, in verse years before it came in the shape of a rebellion or a collapsing army. And underneath that unease sat a system already failing quietly, one enlistment at a time, long before anyone in the capital called it a crisis. A farmer sets down his plough twice a year and picks up a spear. This was the arrangement Tang had built its army on from the start, peasants rotating between their fields and short stretches of garrison duty. Each man supplied his own weapons and armor. It worked well enough for a defensive campaign close to home. It was never built for what Tang's expansion soon demanded of it. From the 630s onward, the empire kept pushing its frontier further from the capital, and the old militia model simply could not follow. A posting meant to last 2 or 3 years stretched into something with no fixed end. Armor wore through and was never replaced. Men who had left their fields expecting to return to them found themselves still stationed at some remote garrison a decade later, their equipment failing. Their promised pensions were delayed or never paid at all. Families found ways around it. Some attached a son to a Buddhist monastery, since religious orders were exempt from the household's military obligation. Others simply left, resettling on newly reclaimed farmland as tenant farmers rather than wait for conscription to take them. None of this happened as a single crisis. It happened quietly, household by household, for the better part of a century. Command structure shifted to match. Permanent garrisons needed permanent commanders. Starting in 710, the court began granting a new title, military governor, to men who ran entire frontier regions rather than short rotating postings. That office expanded steadily through the 710s and 720s. By 737, the court gave up on the militia system for new recruitment entirely, replacing it with paid volunteer troops. The fubing system was formally abolished in 749, by which point mass desertion had already been reported for years. What replaced the farmer soldier was the professional frontier army, permanent, well-equipped, and commanded by a single military governor who answered to no one nearby. Tang increasingly turned to non-Han generals to lead these forces, men who had grown up on the frontier and knew its terrain and its enemies. One of them was a general of mixed Sogdian and Turkic origin named Anlushan. Anlushan's first appearance in the historical record is not flattering. In 736, he was condemned to death for losing his force through rash conduct, then pardoned. It is not the beginning anyone would have guessed would end in an empire torn apart. He rose anyway, given independent command in 742, and rose fast. By 752, following the death of the chief minister, he held 3 frontier provinces under his personal command. He stood as the single most powerful general in the empire. He was, by then, a favorite at court. Emperor Xuanzong trusted him. Yang Guifei, the emperor's cherished consort, formally adopted him as a son in a court ceremony, an honor that placed him deep inside the palace's inner circle. But favor at court came with a rival. Yang Guozhong, the consort's cousin and the dominant minister of the day, saw Anlushan's growing power as a threat to his own. Surveillance, entrapment attempts, mutual suspicion, the two men circled each other for years. By November of 755, Anlushan had convinced himself a plot was underway to strip him of his command. He mobilized roughly 150,000 troops and declared rebellion. Luoyang fell almost immediately. Within the year, he had taken Chang'an itself, forcing Xuanzong's entire court into flight, and declared himself emperor of a rival dynasty. It was during that flight that mutinous imperial guards forced the execution of Yang Guozhong, and then the strangling of Yang Guifei at a roadside inn called Ma Wei. Anlushan did not live to see how his rebellion ended. A eunuch in his own household killed him in 757, with his son's consent. The war he had started ground on for another 6 years under other commanders. What the rebellion actually cost in human life remains genuinely disputed. The commonly repeated figure comes from census records, a population of roughly 52.9 million before the war. Only 16.9 to 17 million were counted after it, a drop popularly framed as 1/6 of everyone alive on Earth at the time. Many historians treat that number with real skepticism. Contemporary accounts of the war do not describe destruction on a scale that would explain 36 million deaths. What they describe instead is a government that could no longer count its own people. Post-rebellion tax registers excluded whole classes of the population. Vast stretches of northern territory fell entirely outside Tang's ability to collect revenue or conduct a census at all. Uncounted is not the same as dead. Household records, which scholars trust more than the raw population figures, tell a steadier story. Roughly 8 to 9 million tax-paying households stood before the rebellion, no more than 4 million after it, a pattern that still held a century later. That points to displacement on a massive scale, families scattering south as northern China's population growth slowed for generations while the south grew rapidly in their place. Real catastrophe, certainly. Just not the specific tidy numbers so often repeated. Huang Chao had failed the civil service examinations more than once. He turned to salt smuggling instead, defying a state monopoly that had made the trade illegal for anyone outside its control. Famine spread through the countryside in the 870s, and government relief never came. By 875, he had raised a rebel army from the anger that famine and neglect had left behind. His forces sacked Chang'an. They sacked Luoyang too, and in 881, with the capital in his hands, Huang Chao briefly declared his own regime in place of Tang. It did not last. Among his own generals was a man named Zhu Wen. In 882, sensing which way the war was turning, Zhu defected back to the weakened Tang court he had been fighting against. He helped crush his former commander by 884, and Tang rewarded him for it. Over the next 2 decades, Zhu Wen built a private empire at Kaifeng. He held the same title, military governor, that had once handed An Lushan 3 provinces and an army loyal only to himself. The rest of the empire was doing the same thing around him, breaking into a patchwork of military territories. Each territory was run by a different general who had helped put down Huang Chao and kept the soldiers afterward. Zhu Wen did not stop building power once he had a province. In 901, he seized Chang'an outright, along with the imperial family inside it. 2 years later, he forced the court to relocate to Luoyang, further from any rival who might defend it. In 904, he had a chancellor killed, then had the emperor himself assassinated, and placed a 13-year-old boy on the throne in his place. The empire now had a capital, a court, and an emperor. It had almost nothing that still belonged to the Tang dynasty in anything but name. One obstacle remained: the officials who still remembered what the dynasty had once been. In February of 905, on the advice of associates, Zhu Wen gave the order. Among those advisors was one man who reportedly still carried a grudge over his own failed examinations years before. More than 30 of the court's most senior officials, the last of the old aristocratic bureaucracy, were seized at a river crossing called Baima, White Horse Station. They were executed there, and their bodies were thrown into the Yellow River. The men doing the killing are said to have mocked their victims as they died, calling them the empire's self-styled clear stream. These were men who had always considered themselves too pure to be touched by the corruption around them. Now, the killers said they could become part of the river's muddy stream forever. This was not a battlefield death. These were men with documented careers, real power, real names, drowned for representing an order Zhu Wen needed gone before he could claim anything for himself. 2 years was all it took after that. With the officials who might have objected already dead, there was no one left inside the court to defend what remained of Tang legitimacy. In 907, with the old bureaucratic class eliminated, Zhu Wen deposed the boy emperor he had installed 3 years earlier. He founded his own dynasty, the later Liang. The last Tang emperor was gone from the throne, and a river still carried the bodies of everyone who might have argued otherwise. Centuries before that river carried its dead, the same mechanism had already found its name and its face. A historian sits in a prison cell in the Han capital in the year 99 before the Common Era. His name is Sima Qian, and he has just been asked to choose the manner of his own ruin. The case that brought him there began far from the capital, on the northern frontier. A Han general named Li Ling, grandson of a celebrated commander, led his troops against the Xiongnu and was surrounded by a force many times his own. He fought until his men were spent, and then he surrendered. At court, the verdict was immediate and unanimous. Li Ling was a traitor, and nothing about his years of prior service would be allowed to complicate that judgment. Sima Qian disagreed, and he said so out loud. He suggested the surrender might not be final, that a soldier with Li Ling's record deserved at least the benefit of doubt. Emperor Wu did not hear a nuanced defense. He heard an insult aimed at himself. Sima Qian was arrested and convicted of defaming the emperor, a capital charge. The law offered one way out, a fine large enough to buy back his life. Sima Qian could not raise it. What remained were two paths: execution or castration, and the court expected him to prefer the first. A man of his standing was supposed to choose death before that kind of humiliation. He chose castration instead, and 3 years in prison alongside it, for a reason that had nothing to do with fear of dying. Years earlier, his father, the court's astrologer and historian before him, had begun a sweeping history of the world as the Han understood it. He had made his son swear to finish it if he could not. That vow outweighed the shame the court assumed would be unbearable. Sima Qian later wrote about the punishment's aftermath in plain terms. The humiliation was so complete, he said, that the memory of it alone made him sweat through his robe. He served the rest of his life as a court eunuch, continuing in his post as official archivist and historian. He carried that diminished status specifically so the work could go on. It did go on. Around 94 before the Common Era, the project was finished, a history called the Shiji. It ran from the legendary Yellow Emperor down to Sima Qian's own lifetime, a span of roughly 2,000 to 3,000 years compressed into one continuous record. He organized it into 5 sections, covering annals of rulers, chronological tables, treatises on ritual and administration, the hereditary noble houses, and finally biographies. That last category was the quiet innovation. Alongside the emperors and generals, Sima Qian gave full biographies to merchants, to assassins, to men history had no obligation to remember at all. The structure he chose would outlive him by 2,000 years, copied by every official history that came after. What Sima Qian did at the scale of one body, one vow to a dying father, the Chinese state later did at the scale of entire dynasties. Starting formally with the Tang, it became institutional practice for a new dynasty to write the official history of the one it had just destroyed. The logic underneath it was the same doctrine that justified Zhou's conquest of Shang centuries earlier. No ruler held power simply by holding it. He held the mandate of heaven, or he did not. A dynasty's collapse could only mean that mandate had been withdrawn through some moral failure of its own rulers. Historians working for the new court did not need to invent evidence of that failure so much as arrange it. The template repeated itself with remarkable consistency. A dynasty's founder appears in these histories as a figure of wisdom, someone who ended chaos and built something lasting. The final rulers of the dynasty he replaced appear as weak, self-indulgent, and the authors of their own ruin. One story justifies the other. This was not an occasional habit. It became fixed state practice, continuing from Tang all the way through to the Qing. Over that span, it produced a closed set of 24 sanctioned histories, each modeled on the annals, treatises, and biographies Sima Qian had structured centuries before. The pattern was, at times, almost transparent about its own workings. In the 11th century, a Song emperor decided the existing history of Tang was not organized well enough, not dignified enough. He ordered an entirely new version written from scratch. The project took 17 years. It was undertaken for reasons of prestige and clarity, as much as for accuracy. A dynasty rewrote its predecessor's story a second time, simply because the first version no longer suited it. The same era produced a second, quieter instance of the same instinct. In 1080, a Song emperor gathered 7 older military treatises, some reaching back to the 5th century before the Common Era, including Sun Tzu's Art of War. He declared them a fixed canon, the 7 military classics, required study for any officer seeking promotion. The texts themselves were centuries old. Deciding which ones counted as timeless wisdom and binding them together as a single authoritative tradition was a Song dynasty act performed on the past to serve the present. The same mechanism runs through everything this episode has covered. Visible everywhere, it was never named. Shang's last king was rendered as a monster by the Zhou who overthrew him. Xia, quite possibly invented outright as Zhou's mirror-opposite villain, a corrupt predecessor, needed to make a new legitimacy doctrine look like a law of history. Every collapse, every founding told afterward by whoever survived to do the telling. Sima Qian gave that pattern its first great written form at the cost of his own body. The dynasties that followed gave it an institution, a bureaucracy, a fixed shelf of 24 books still standing. Later tradition would bundle 4 of this civilization's technologies into a single proud phrase: paper, printing, gunpowder, and the compass, and call them the 4 great inventions. The phrase is true. It is also easy to misread if the listener pictures the finished, familiar version of each one arriving fully formed. Paper did not begin with a single inventor at a single moment. Archaeological fragments of plant fiber, pressed thin enough to write on, predate the date popular memory usually gives it. The oldest surviving scrap is dated to roughly 179 years before the Common Era. What happened in the year 105 of the Common Era was smaller and more specific. A court eunuch named Kai Lun standardized an improved process using bark, hemp, rags, and old fishing net. He refined a material that already existed. He did not summon it from nothing. Printing followed a similar path, crude first, polished later. Woodblock printing developed under the Tang, and administrative documents were already being produced this way by the middle of the 8th century. The clearest surviving proof of how the technology was actually used is a single book, the Diamond Sutra, printed in the year 868. It is the oldest complete printed book in the world with a confirmed date. Its own printed dedication states its purpose plainly, made for universal free distribution, commissioned by a man named Wang Ji in honor of his parents. One ordinary man's motive, preserved by accident across 11 centuries. Each woodblock could only ever reproduce a single fixed page. Movable type. The version most people picture belonged to a different and later age entirely. Gunpowder's origin is stranger than either, and it circles back to something this episode has already touched. Taoist alchemists were not searching for a weapon. They were searching for an elixir of immortality, following the same tradition of chasing eternal life that has run underneath this story from the start. In pursuit of that elixir, they began combining sulfur, saltpeter, and charcoal. The earliest written formula for the resulting compound survives in a Taoist text dated to the year 808. Within 2 generations, another Taoist text was warning explicitly that certain elixir recipes were too dangerous to experiment with. The danger was recognized inside an alchemist's workshop, long before anyone thought to point it at an enemy. Its first documented uses were fireworks and firecrackers, noise and light for a festival, not warfare. The compass completes the set, and it begins furthest from where it would end up. Han Dynasty observers noticed that a certain magnetized stone, lodestone, would always settle in the same direction when balanced freely. They shaped it into a spoon and set it on a flat bronze plate, watching which way it swung to answer questions of fortune and placement. The device was built for divination, for reading the will of the earth beneath a chosen building site. Whether that same alignment could guide a ship at sea would not occur to anyone for a very long time. What connects all 4 is the hands doing the inventing, more than the invention itself. A diviner reading how a spoon comes to rest. An alchemist chasing eternal life and finding, instead, something that could kill. A printer carving 1 block at a time so a son could honor his parents. None of them were working toward the version their invention would eventually become. They were solving the problem directly in front of them, and history kept the results. The same forgetting and reassembling happened to stories, not only to objects. Somewhere in that process, a monkey climbed out of legend and into a novel. By the time he arrived there, almost nothing about him was original to any single mind. His starting point was real. A monk named Xuanzang walked out of China in the year 629. He did not return for 16 years, 10,000 miles, and a library's worth of Buddhist scripture. That much is documented history, already told earlier in this account. What happened to his journey afterward is a different kind of story. The story of a story growing. Within a few centuries, Buddhist retellings of the pilgrimage began adding companions who had never existed, supernatural figures to protect the monk on his road. Song Dynasty tale-tellers picked up these proto-legends and elaborated them further. Yuan dynasty playwrights staged them, giving the companions dialogue, personality, rivalry. By the time Wu Chang'an fixed the tradition into a single novel, somewhere around the year 1592, he was not inventing a monkey king. He was compiling one out of 9 centuries of accumulated retelling. Even the monkey's shape carries more than one ancestry. Scholars trace pieces of him to the Hindu monkey god Hanuman, likely carried east along Buddhist trade routes and translated texts. Other pieces trace to old Buddhist teaching tales that used clever monkeys to illustrate wisdom. Still others trace to native Chinese folklore about mountain spirits and ape-like beings older than either import. No single tradition can claim him whole. The heaven he rebels against turns out to have its own quiet history, just as assembled as he is. The Jade Emperor, ruler of the celestial bureaucracy that punishes Sun Wukong for his ambition, was barely mentioned in early Taoism. He gained ground slowly through the Tang dynasty. He was only formally installed as supreme god of that bureaucracy under the Song, after an emperor claimed a vision of him in the year 1007. The bureaucracy Sun Wukong defies, in other words, was itself still being built while the legend of his defiance was taking shape. And the insult that finally breaks his loyalty is a bureaucratic one before it is anything else. Heaven does not mistreat him. Heaven hands him a menial, low-ranking post beneath what his power should have earned him. It is the rank, not the cruelty, that turns him against the court. A god's rebellion, staged as an argument over promotion, tells the listener something about which anxieties this culture found universal enough to put inside a myth. One more figure closes this out, and he begins as a man rather than a legend. Guan Yu served as a general under the warlord Liu Bei during the chaos that followed the Han dynasty's collapse. He was captured and executed around the year 219 or 220. What came after his death took 14 centuries to finish happening. The process started small. Buddhist temples during the Sui and Tang periods adopted him as a guardian figure, tied to a legend involving a Buddhist master. Tang emperors granted him modest posthumous honors. Nothing about this yet suggested the scale of what was coming. The real acceleration began under the Song, an age of near-constant warfare against northern rivals when the court wanted a martial protector it could point to. A Song emperor formally inducted Guan Yu into the state Taoist pantheon as a full deity, the first ruler to do so. The Mongol Yuan dynasty carried him further, naming him an official god of war, while Yuan-era drama reshaped him into a complete embodiment of loyalty and honor. Then came the Ming, whose general tolerance for popular religious cults let Guan Yu's worship expand faster than under any dynasty before it. A Ming emperor eventually granted him the title of emperor outright, Guandi, sometime in the late 1500s or early 1600s. The Qing continued the climb, formally folding Guandi worship into state ceremony by the year 1725, eventually honoring him on the same ceremonial level as Confucius. What makes Guan Yu unusual is not the height of his worship, but its width. Soldiers prayed to him as a god of war, drawing on the loyalty and courage he had shown Liu Bei to the end. The imperial state endorsed the same reading, useful for demanding loyalty from its own subjects. Merchants prayed to him for something else entirely. His reputation for scrupulous honesty read as a guarantee against dishonest dealing, and he became, improbably, a god of wealth. Secret societies and sworn brotherhoods claimed him too, binding their own oaths to his example, even as the state that persecuted those same societies claimed him for itself. Folk tradition even remembers him working, before any of this, as a bean-curd peddler. It is one story among several offered to explain why tradesmen far from any battlefield still keep his image on their altars. Nobody edited the biography to make this work. The same loyalty, the same honesty, the same unbending refusal to bend sat still. Every community that needed a god simply reached in and took what it needed from him. One general, one death. 1,000 years of divergent afterlives still being written.